Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Trish.
And this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world. Whatever we find interesting, and we hope you will too. We are a proud member of the Social Suplex Podcast Network, and you can find our content on our podcast feed, the Social Suplex Podcast feed, as well as on Twitter, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. We also have a store at Chopped Tees, so if you would like to support us or just own a nice piece of merchandise, please take a look at chopped-tees.com/Social Suplex Network. Today is Sunday, April 27, 2025. And before we get started, we have a little bit of podcast business, as Trish and I will be taking a break for our next show, which would have aired on May 13th. We will be skipping that week, and you will hear back from us the week of May 27th, which will be the Double or Nothing pay-per-view week. So we hope to come back to you then with some interesting discussion of said pay-per-view. We're going to kick things off today and have a conversation about what was a full mask-off WrestleMania, both the week before and the week after in the world of WWE, where a lot of folks who, I think, put out of their minds the shit show of a company that WWE is, had to confront the uncomfortable reality of what WWE is in the year 2025. And I think I have a couple of examples here. Was this mythical individual, you, a believer in the myth of a loving Papa H, someone who cares about his wrestlers and, feels strongly like a father to them? Well, you got to hear Triple H on the High Performance podcast bemoaning how many NXT wrestlers become complacent and out of shape when they get called up to the main roster. You could watch Bayley cry on Chris Van Vliet's podcast as she talked about doing an entire build to a Mania match only to get taken out with a quote-unquote injury at the last second for Becky Lynch, an injury that was immediately leaked to the dirt sheets as not a real injury and the plan for months. Were you excited that WWE was partnering with other wrestling companies like Noah and TNA? You got to watch the TNA men's champion Joe Hendry get an incredible WrestleMania moment by being squashed by Randy Orton in 3 minutes. You got to watch WWE announce that they had bought AAA, one of Mexico's 2 largest wrestling promotions, and then hear Conan tell us on his podcast that Mexican wrestlers were going to need to learn English and learn how to wrestle the WWE style. Did you think that WWE being owned and run by TKO media moguls like Ari Emanuel and Nick Khan meant a more professional, polished, and less carny WWE? Listen to Nick Khan tell Bill Simmons that WWE is the underdog when it comes to any competition between them and other wrestling companies. The same underdog WWE that earns $580 million per year just for Raw and SmackDown media rights, and also gets the cherry on top of $100 million per year from the government of Saudi Arabia, and let alone any other taxpayer money that they can con out of other cities and municipalities. Were you somebody who hand-waved away Triple H's Trump White House photo or his being behind Linda McMahon during her Senate hearing for Secretary of Education, who excused it as Triple H supporting his mother-in-law, a woman who hadn't worked for the company in years? Here's Triple H on the Flagrant podcast talking about how Trump is a charismatic, amazing genius. Here's Roman Reigns in Vanity Fair praising Trump as competent and positive and respected as a world leader. Did you think it was okay that WWE had so many ties to Trump because progressives like Sami Zayn and CM Punk worked there? You got to listen to Sami Zayn laugh on stage at the Mania roast while comedians and WWE personalities made racist, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic jokes at the expense of people who weren't at that event and in some cases don't even work at WWE anymore. You got to listen to CM Punk tell Kazim on The Ringer that it would be ridiculous for him to quit his job just because people on Twitter called WWE a MAGA company. Were you bought into the whole bad man gone myth that the sexism and racism and homophobia that was just a clear and obvious part of WWE throughout its history was over now that bad man Vince McMahon was no longer with the company? Here's Paul Heyman on Pat McAfee's show threatening to have a Hispanic audience member deported. All of this, the shit sandwich that WWE wanted to shove in the face of people who believed in the kinder, more gentle WWE as they headed into WrestleMania week, and tried to feel good about the shit tons of money they spent on what ended up being, I think, by all accounts, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 matches, a really disappointing 2 sets of evenings. Trish, What are your thoughts on the week leading up to Mania and Mania itself as we move into this weird post-shoot shit show of a situation?
We're after all that. I think, this has been a Trish and Sarah wrestling podcast. What have I got left to say?
These fuckers fired me up, I'll tell you that for free.
It was very good. It's round of applause. Even my bad clapping. This one is really a week where it's kind of like, where do you start? Because there were so many different elements. And what I think was most kind of different this year compared to last year was last year, even though they were moving into a pivot, they moved away from Rock and Roman when Rock had come in and kind of shook everything about and eventually gone back to kind of where they originally were going. They had a really disciplined media strategy.
Yes.
They took aim at AEW and they made damage to AEW, but also they promoted their big events. They promoted the big matches. Cody and Roman was the centerpiece of this week. And this week, at times, it felt like they didn't have a centerpiece. At times, it felt like there was a definite media strategy to kind of move more into a TKO umbrella in terms of, that more right-wing stance and more alignment with what you'd see with the UFC. And at times, it was just completely batshit. I don't really know how else to describe it. But I think we should probably start with the shows themselves and then probably go from there, because
I like it.
When you look at all the media stuff, all that kind of would dissipate or wouldn't have as much kind of resonance if the shows were really strong.
Right.
So coming out last year, they had the really strong media showing, they managed to do damage to the competition, and, there was a huge amount of positivity coming off the two shows in Philadelphia, especially the second night. And this year, we don't have that. And we don't have that not because of some of the things that they've said, although that was magnified, especially this week with The Rock running his mouth on Pat McAfee.
We're going to get into that, because that's a good fucking time.
Who saw that coming, huh? But yeah, it's the two shows where it starts. So, you don't know which way you want to split this down, but there's so many different things. So I'll start with the positive things that they got right. Should we do that first?
I think I think it's a shorter topic because they got quite a lot of things wrong. So let's rip through that.
So first of all, like the women's freeway that opened night 2. So Io Sky, Rhea Ripley, Bianca Belair. Yep. That was the best match they had all the weekend. Everything that they did in the story led into that match, so it built perfectly. So the whole idea was that Rhea and Bianca are kind of squabbling, but they're overlooking Io, and that is the story of the match. Right. And it didn't need the theatre elements that were in the night before with Seth and Punk and Reigns with Heyman. It was just literally like, this is a story we're telling coming in, and this is a story we're going to execute with our moves in the match, and we're going to give that sense of triumph to Io at the end because she's been the odd one out in that story, so it fits. She is the one that should get this thing here, otherwise, she's in trouble. So they did a really good job with that. The match I thought it was fantastic, even, WWE freeway style, one of the strongest women's matches this year. And it continues the theme of, women's match kind of stealing a show this year on many shows. Or even
across multiple promotions, yeah.
Yeah, so, just that was fantastic. And I think the way they positioned Io coming out on Raw as well, she's had one of the stronger presentations of anybody that is working, and especially when they let her speak. She speaks Japanese as well as English in her promos. She's treated as a star, not this is someone from Japan, or she doesn't have that stigma. They actually are. Her presentation this week was very much she's a star on a level with everybody else, or maybe above, and that's something they got right. My other one. So the other one is might sound surprising, but when it came to the way they did the main event the night before, I thought that there was some strong performance in there. I thought that Seth Rollins is, he obviously is very key at pinning those three ways together that they do in WWE in that style.
Yep.
Because, you think about funny enough, the only two that really come to mind straight away when you think about comparables for men's three-ways are two that he was in. The one with The Miz and Finn Balor at WrestleMania 34, and the Royal Rumble one with I think it's John Cena and Brock Lesnar. So he does a great role in terms of pinning all that together. And the way that they managed to get, people invested in action, even though everybody's waiting for the Heyman betrayal bits at the end, I think they did a really good job of. I thought Roman Reigns worked harder than I've seen him in years. He was flying about at one point, and I was just like, who are you? Where did you come from? I haven't seen you work this hard in such a long time. But yeah, I thought he did a good job of that as well. And I don't know if they achieved what they wanted to in the end with that match in terms of the response, because when Seth turns, he's cheered massively. Or they just sing a song, so there's no actual, real reaction. And there is the funny element. So there's a bit, so they do the thing where, he's going to be with Punk. And I think I was told this for someone who watches, all of their TV. It was quite obvious that it was never going to be Punk that he left with, because Punk got so much in the build. They did the whole, you got your pretend WrestleMania main event. You've got Heyman coming in with you. He gets all the offense in, the first 10 minutes. So it became quite clear quite early on that he wasn't going to be, at the end of this match. And it was really funny, actually, because he just kind of got blasted from the outside and was just completely missing for the last 5 minutes. So he was like an accessory. It wasn't even part of the finish. He couldn't have been less important. It was very strange. Or maybe not. But then they get to the end, and it's like, Roman's got a chair, and Heyman's like, oh, you can hit him. And it's like, we set this up on TV the week before where we mimicked, the Seth Shield turn from Indianapolis back in the day, and it was like, okay, yeah, so we're mirroring that, and we set it up on TV so you'll remember it, and then they do that thing, and as soon as he gives it to Roman, you go, yeah, okay, Seth's Seth. And it's kind of interesting because, Rollins is that company soldier. He's that guy that will go out and do everything he's asked to, doesn't really complain, never probably gets the rubber to green. I actually think he gets a little bit too much stick from the internet sometimes because, I think he's a sneaky numbers guy. And in-ring wise, for their style, and you've got to remember that their style was completely different to how we might, enjoy other companies.
Right.
I think he does a good job. And, he's now that guy in that high-profile position. And I think that it's quite likely that this is Roman putting himself in his own, Paul Heyman putting, his story in his own bubble. Yeah, keeping it away from whatever's going on with Cena and The Rock and everything else, because the likelihood is, if you're going to do this Seth group and you've added Braun Breaker and you maybe add, I don't know, potentially a Sami Zayn if he turns on Jey Uso, you could pick up that secondary title, and then, as our friend Connor suggested, you could have Seth and Roman at SummerSlam for the, they got 2-night SummerSlam in New Jersey. That's a night, isn't it? They'll feed off all that Shield nostalgia. So I feel like he's built his own little bubble, but in terms of what they did in terms of connecting that story and their way of connecting, I think he did a good job.
Anything else that you thought was good on this show, or worth of being part of WrestleMania, I should say? A strong indictment, if ever I heard one. Endorsement, indictment, whatever. 6 of one, half a dozen of another. All right.
It works either way. It works either way.
We had 2 good matches on a show that had 10 hours worth of wrestling? No, sorry, 8.5 hours worth of wrestling.
No, it's more like 6 hours of wrestling.
That's right.
6 hours.
6 hours. I have to do that. What's that Twitter gimmick that does that, where it's like, X number of minutes of wrestling and X number of minutes of other bullshit. Right, but of that time, of the amount of show, you got 2 matches. That definitely seems like it's a change from previous years in terms of the amount of stuff that was entertaining. At least recent years, I think I could say. It does feel like the last 2 WrestleManias were received and enjoyed more than this one was. There was a lot of stuff that didn't seem like there was any significant build to it. There was a lot of stuff on the card that seemed like it wasn't done very well. I know Rey Fenix had to fill in at the last minute for Rey Mysterio because he was injured, which led to Rey Fenix being pinned in was that his first match or no?
Second match.
Second match.
It's 2 weeks. He's been 2 weeks since he debuted in Chicago, yeah.
Right, and he got pinned. And again, obviously I understand everyone was really quick to tell me that losing at WrestleMania is still, really good for you, apparently. But just some odd booking decisions here overall.
Yeah, because the thing is like, there's lots of talk, when we get to the Rock stuff, there's lots of talk about, the Rock ruined WrestleMania and stuff, and Cena's got the I ruined WrestleMania gimmick. But there are so many of the issues coming in that just played out here. They couldn't save it. They couldn't rescue it by the in-ring or the crowd or anything like that. It wasn't there. And I think it's one of the most noticeable things about the crowd they have for WrestleManias now, in general, is just like the lack of motion. So we've been watching some of the older stuff back on... it flips up on like their YouTube channel and stuff. And you see some of the older Mania crowds. And I think some of this might be price inducing as well. The crowds are changing because the price is different. But they were so much more lively. There's like an energy at the start of the show. Go and watch like WrestleMania 32 for like the, maybe not 32. Is that the ladder match? 31. The ladder match that Daniel Bryan won. And you can just see the energy as soon as these guys walk out for that match, and I can feel that in a number of other things. And you did see more of that at night too, to be fair. Like when they came out, when the three women came out, it was a different energy. But in that first night in particular, it was like soulless for a lot of it. It's like a pin drop, but a lot of that is because of what they did. So you have like Jey Uso and
main event Jey Uso, yes, main event Jey Uso in the opening match. Tremendous gimmick. They went first. That was not really exciting. Get yourself going.
But they thought the big entrance thing would be enough, right? So you do your eats and all that sort of thing. But I didn't think there was any energy for that match. And normally you open it, you get that extra burst of energy, so everyone that's in it feels like the most over people in the world. Yeah. That's why MJF loves the opening spot so much. Like, everyone thinks you're the biggest star because you get the first pops, you get that initial release of energy. And I didn't feel that match had any of that. And it wasn't the strongest match. It's Jey Uso. And then the finish, they did the submission where he beats Gunn for his own game by getting the submission on him on the sleeper. But I don't know, it just felt like there wasn't this huge outpouring of kind of emotion and like... The reaction that Dominic Mysterio got on the second day was the reaction I expected Jey Uso to get on this one. And he didn't. And then it just like continued through the card. You had this New Day match where they regained the tag titles. And it was like, that had no energy. And if you remember the New Day turn, everyone was praising that to death.
Yeah.
And then nothing happened. And then the War Raiders had no story practically going in. There was things they could have pulled on and they didn't. And then you had silence. And then the work wasn't very good, whether that's because of the atmosphere or not. But it's like... all these things where you had these massive happenings that everyone kind of gravitated and went over and over and over, and then it just doesn't play into anything. It doesn't become anything because that's where the build did not work. There wasn't any energy to them. They all suffered, and that carried on like through that first part of that show. You had a combination, of poor builds and then also work that was like really weak in terms of. It felt like there was like no contact. Do you know, like it's like. They felt rehearsed, So it didn't feel like anyone's actually like not laying. You don't need to lay it in necessarily. It doesn't need to be Strong Style New Japan. We don't need to be Nakajima here. But there has to be something where it looks like you're having an impact. And even something like Jacob Fatu and LA Knight, and Fatu was the first one to kind of get some reaction out of the crowd. Was like there was no impact. It was like you could see it all kind of going to the side, and it was just bizarre because it just felt like that everyone was going easy on a night where you expect everyone to kind of completely go for it.
Well, do you think this is, I mean, I feel like in listening to you talk about this, you've got like a couple of reasons for this, right? You know, the crowd, the build, and the actual work itself, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot has been discussed about the crowd and people being priced out of WrestleMania, longtime fans being unable to go. I know Brian Alvarez talked about, he was in Las Vegas that week and had met a lot of people there who had traveled in for Mania stuff, but weren't able to go to actual WrestleMania itself because of the pricing. Do you think, like, of the three things you've listed, which one do you think is the most significant or the biggest red flag if you're WWE in terms of crowd reactions?
The thing is, so as much as you can see like the floor and the motion when it's on the floor, the fact that you had such little noise it should be the biggest one, because this is your hardcore element, right? So the people that are still going are spending an absolute fortune. Or your travellers that go, I know many of them, they go every single year. They've been to 25 straight or whatever, whichever it is, for the ones that have been open to crowds. They travel year upon year. If you look at them first few rows, I can spot people that I've met, that have been to show after show after show. And if you go back and you watch their other shows, you can see their behaviour change. And it's like, so what is it? Is it it's not them that's changing, is it the product? And you can get away with that when you're in normal arenas, when you're doing Raw and SmackDown, you're feeding crowd noise in. But you need that motion, you need that energy for your performance, I think, more over than anyone. So I think it's a feed of all of them. It's a thing of, and I think that's the theme. So when you look at the wider element, is all the things that they were doing strongly that got them into this position, that got them hot, so to speak, they're pulling away from. So whether it's what you talked about in the intro, whether it's like the bad man gone stuff, and we're the kind of gentler WWE, and we look after our talent, and we are socially, we're not politically involved in a way that we are now. People could look past that because they didn't see it, or anything like that. Or even, talent and happiness. You've got Karrion Kross going out doing work shoot promos. The work shoot promos have just exploded. Tiffany Stratton and Charlotte Flair on that night.
It just seems like the work shoot stuff is just nuts. Like you talked about Tiffany Stratton and Bianca Belair. The Bayley stuff is clearly leading, regardless of what her happiness actually is or isn't, is clearly leading to some kind of program with Becky Lynch.
Yes.
You said Karrion Kross. You've got Seth out there sort of making sort of weird, stuff about that too. Like, it's just, the whole thing is just, again, like you talked about, there's so much that they're moving away from that created them as being successful, that it's sort of like, what is this change? Is this just an inevitable cycle, right? We saw AEW go through it. Is this just an inevitable life cycle of a successful promotion that's, gotten almost too much success and now it has to try and manage all these egos and deal with all this stuff?
Some of it. Yeah, this is a WrestleMania of kind of, trying to fit everybody in and trying to make everybody happy. And that's why we saw so many multi-mans. You saw so many things where things have been kind of thrown in and thrown together. Yep. And it's also a case of, with the work shoot stuff and that, is one of the things that they did really well when, with the bloodline stuff and everything like that, it's two parts of it. So the first one was, it made you believe in a story. Not in, reality is more interesting than the story, which is what the AEW problem has been for, a long period of time since 2021. When the reality is more interesting than the story, then you're never going to grow, you're never going to succeed. And all of a sudden we're flipping that now. And it's just taken over the promotion. And it's everywhere from top to bottom. So, do you believe in these people? Do you believe in these characters? Or do you want to see what is it you want to see? And the more they pull back on that, the worse that'll get. But also what it does is when you start getting that success, you then attract all the old guard back. And this is like the ultimate on that, because when you look at the Night 2 main event, when you look at Cody and Cena, this is the ultimate of, we spent 3 years building Cody Rhodes. Yeah. We brought him in, we debuted him with Seth Rollins in that big spot. We gave him the Rumble win. We then did the Roman decision, good or bad, or whatever. But then we basically built him the entire next year. We put him over Lesnar. We put him over whoever. We basically try and keep the fans behind him. We market him like that. We don't do anything that could scupper his reactions. To the point where when Kevin Owens turned heel, they didn't do it in front of the crowd because they didn't want the crowd cheering and getting that replicated. And now we do all of that. And in the space of 2 months, we have pretty much tried to self-sabotage that. And is that a case? So I think Wade Keller made a point this week, and I kind of been thinking a little bit about it, and he says, the only way that you can make, big main event stars is if the main event stars of the past go away, eventually. Yep. And we can talk about a bit more about New Japan later, but it's like, is that the case here? So rather than, they go away, and then the bloodline stuff works, that's more prominent. No one comes back and kind of undermines that. They're seen as like a side thing, other than when The Rock got involved at the end, and that did hurt Roman. And then this year, you come back, you have this Rock thing where he comes back, and Cody waits and questions it, and that makes you look at the character differently. And then you get him to Cena, and yes, it's normally better with a heel-face dynamic if someone puts in the effort. But then you've got this situation now where, Cena's in his last year, they're going to cheer him. but also you've made them doubt the Cody character. You've now undermined that Cody character. And then you go out and you do one of the most abysmal match layouts I have ever seen. And you get to the end after like an absolute dire match that has that atmosphere where, you know, both competitors are just being booed, which always says to me, and, you know, the other prominent example is always going to be Double or Nothing 2020,
right.
sorry, right? If both people are getting booed, then you've got something wrong. You've done your storytelling, something has gone wrong here. That's always my thinking. And it was very clear something had gone wrong here. But then to add that out, you do that layout, and then you get to the end and you have the big Travis Scott entrance, which what's a Mets player? There was a Mets pitcher that hit a home run. Oh God, my memory's going. And it was like he did like the slowest kind of home run trot ever. And it's like, God, someone's gonna be shouting at me when I say this because I'm like, my brain's just fried. Oh, Bartolo Colon, right? He hits this home run in San Diego, and it's like the slowest trot ever, to the point where they all run down the dugout because he's still going around the bases. This was slower than that, right? So Cody has to lay on the floor, and he's stuck there as this guy like poses at the top of the ramp and gets his full musical entrance. Then he walks all the way down, and Cody's still there. Then they do the little thing, and then they do the belt shot thing where he's like, oh, I'm not going to hit him with the belt. And it's like, he just looks so weak. You spent 3 years building this guy, and you made him look a complete stupid geek.
Well, I think let's talk about this main event and like the stuff around it, because I agree with you that Cody looked like a fucking dumbass. But I also think it's fascinating because the big excuse this week, and the one that came out almost immediately, and you know, props to Rich Latta for immediately saying we're going to get the Triple H excuse tour, that it's all The Rock's fault. But it does seem like, you know, and I'm, you know, we'll get into the Rock stuff in a little bit, but it does seem like there certainly were things that could have been done differently, both in the build to this and in the match itself, regardless of whether Rock was involved or not, or whether, you know, if Rock is telling the truth or they weren't sure, blah, 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 right? And so, like, I think my question is, it was so bad, it made me wonder whether Triple H was intentionally sandbagging it to make The Rock look bad, right? Or is this John Cena? Like, is he such a big star that you know, Triple H can't tell him what to do? And as a result, we end up in a situation where, you know, Cena thinks this is a good match layout. Like, he's on, like, this is what he wants to, like, this is what he thinks a good heel turn is, right? Like a bunch of you people promos.
Have we got people completely warped about how to work heel now? Like,
right.
Are they all fucked in the head? Like with it, it's like, oh, like we got to turn heel, and now we got to do this, and they can't figure out, like, yeah, you take things away. So fine, you take the music away. You take we didn't take the music away. You take like the big graphics away, but like that doesn't mean that you need to work like that. And I don't know if he can or not. I don't know if this is a case of he's taking things away or he just doesn't have that.
Yeah, he's just not capable of it. Yeah.
And, you know, to put him in that environment with 25 minutes sort of things. But what got me was, you know, there's lots of different elements of this. So you've got to think about what they've done in the build. So Cena was missing for half of it.
Yep.
He cut most of his promos not giving a fuck about Cody.
Nope.
Right? Then Cody, who got attacked, first response when he came out in Brussels wasn't to be mad or try and attack him. And it was funny because at the time we compared it to MJF and Hangman because they literally did the same segment and Hangman went schizo and tries to get him, right?
Yep.
And instead they do a thing where he comes out and he's like doing the pose and the whoa, and it's just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, yeah. And then you do, we'll just throw in a work shoot promo. And at the end, you know, they could see kind of maybe it coming because they did the SmackDown in Vegas and Cody's getting booed and he wins the crowd around, but that's never a good sign. It's one of those things where you know it's going to turn into something on the Sunday. But then he's doing the old Cena lines of, you know, well, it doesn't matter, you know, and that's when you know he's losing because he's literally like, well, you know, you can't wrestle. So, yeah, so great. So you're going to get beat by a guy that can't wrestle. But then they did other things, right? So some of these have been picked up on, some of them haven't. So they had like the Rock shirt in the shop, which is one of those, it's one of those WrestleMania things. So if you go to like a week like that, or even like a New Japan week or anything like that, or All In, you know, you'll pick up on little things that will kind of clue you into things. And it will kind of go round. It's like a game of Chinese whispers. It's obviously, these days it's much worse because of the internet, but it's like, so people will pick up on stuff like that. But then this is the one that no one spoke about. If you go and watch the WrestleMania pre-show on a Sunday, right? So you've got the last 10 minutes. So if you consider pre-shows, traditionally they've been used, like the last 10 minutes is used to like hard sell the pay-per-view, right?
Right.
And this is POE, so it's on Peacock, it's on Netflix, but it's the same deal. The last 10 minutes are basically spent on The Rock. This is what The Rock's going to do. The Rock has to show up. The Rock has to be part of this because, you know, he was all part of this. And everything they moved away from when they hadn't mentioned The Rock for all them weeks, all of a sudden, we were talking all about The Rock, right? It's the same thing. You told your audience this. The Rock not showing up, like, is not on The Rock in terms of expectation. You set the expectation. You know, you set the expectation right before this pay-per-view on your streaming platform.
That's what makes you think it's a play, right? Because at that point, when they're having that conversation, everybody there knows The Rock's not physically in the building. They know that they've laid the match out. They know that they've done the rehearsals. They know The Rock is not doing the run-in. So, like, did no one clue in the people in the pre-show? Like, did they just assume he was going to show up and that it was being kept a secret from them?
Can you actually believe that you would spend the last 10 minutes on something on a pre-show if, like, you weren't under some sort of expectation? Would you? Well, I can't see it. I can't see that.
That's the part that makes me think that they set it up to have an out to be like fucking, you know, so they could blame the whole thing on him.
Maybe they did, you know, and that's part of the interplay. And, you know, Triple H is going to get his Nine Knives card out of this. He'll get people saying, you know, it's all Rock, you know, that was responsible for everything. But those problems are still there. And it's the same when you deliver certain things on Raw the next night because you do the happenings, right? You have the, you know, this week, you've had the return of Miro, you had the return of Aleister Black. What's his... Is he Aleister Black there? Was he Aleister Black? Is he Aleister Black?
He's Aleister Black, yeah.
What's his AEW name? Have I gone insane? Malachi, oh, for fuck's sake. Yeah,
Jesus Christ, Trish, I'm worried about you mentally.
Two names in 10 minutes.
Those are funny to me because I'm like, first of all, Zelina Vega winning a fucking belt the night that Malister comes back, and then on top of that goes right into a fucking program with the fucking Miz. Like, just like, why did Tony ever give this man money? Like, why did we ever have to watch this man on AEW television? Like, just like provided us with literally give us nothing, King, and then go back to WWE so you can do a fucking program with the Miz. And if he loses a match to the Miz, I'm gonna laugh my ass off for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And Rusev, like, oh, he's going to beat up Alpha Academy. Wow, you guys, like, such an incredible work you did. I think about all of the people that had, like, convinced themselves that, like, Andrade and Miro and fucking Malachi Black were these incredible wrestlers who were just being booked like shit by Vince. And it turned out, like, yeah, that was not the case. But anyway, that's a side note for another time. But it was pretty fucking funny.
Yeah, but it's these happenings, right? So now it's distracted because we've had these happenings. But the follow-up wasn't there for any of these things going into WrestleMania.
No.
And then you get a cheap outs, like the way they brought Becky Lynch back. So you didn't bring her back before, but you're going to bring her back in a tag program, and then she's going to turn straight away. But because she's just come back and she's the recognised star, she's going to get cheered over Lyra.
Yep.
And there's a part of me that knows that she can work a crowd if she wants to. But why would you put yourself in position? It's like you are chasing happenings constantly because you need this constant attention because you need to keep these numbers at a constant level. You can't... It now feels like they're at the point where they're not comfortable with letting things build. They don't feel like they can let things build. So instead, we're going to throw these things at you. And this is where The Rock gets his leverage.
Yep.
Because, you know, this has been the undercurrent story. So... whichever way you judge the Netflix ratings, and, you know, some are more bullish on that than others, and I think that's because we have such different kind of estimates depending on who's doing the estimates, you know, compared them to Nielsen ratings, because, you know, the data is so hard to kind of peruse and use in that way. But whatever you think of that, there has been some interesting other data, and whether that be, you know, the attendance numbers, where we've seen Raw and SmackDown kind of stagnate in quarter four. And they always suffer, you know, you're always going to see market to market slightly different in quarter four in that regard for WWE because their whole of quarter one is built towards WrestleMania, right?
Right.
So you've got this quarter four is a weaker quarter for them in terms of that. But then coming into the new year, we've seen Raw kind of take off. So they're getting something out of this next thing. And you're seeing SmackDown, you know, taking, you know, loss after loss and after loss in market to market. I think I only have... a couple of up market to market. And this is where The Rock can walk in. Because this is what we're forgetting about this. And the reason why the Chamber and why he can claim the Chamber, and I actually think he's right, and I did think at the time, too, is because...
So basically what we have to do the explanation thing, Trish. So Rock's Rock, when he went on Pat McAfee, and we're going to get into that in a second, he made the claim that Ari Emanuel called him and said, I need you to be on Elimination Chamber because Elimination Chamber is not selling enough tickets. And this was scoffed at by a number of people, including Brian Alvarez, who said, what are you talking about? Elimination Chamber did great business. Not mentioning the fact that at the time that Rock would have gotten this phone call, Elimination Chamber was not doing good business. The numbers were very disappointing. That was a fucking show that they did was it the Rogers Center? The baseball stadium, right? It was set up, you could put 50K in there, 45, 50K in there. And they ended up with, 35? And I think at the time they called The Rock, were like just over 20. And we called that out. Like, that was something Trish mentioned when we did a show about how the fact that they had put The Rock on that show because Elimination Chamber wasn't doing the business that it was doing. So that's a thing that I think is an important piece to number. The thing that ties all of this together that I want to touch on before you go on to the next part is you have to remember that it's not enough for WWE to do good business. They have to do incredible business. They have to do better than everything they've done before business. They can't see even stagnation because they have to show their shareholders and however many $1 billion worth of debt that they're currently carrying as part of TKO that they're capable of growth. Okay, so when you say, "Oh, why would Ari Emanuel care about the Rock at Elimination Chamber?" Because they can't show stagnation. They've promised profits to their shareholders, and they have to make those profits. That's where all of this comes back to, and is an important part to remember when we discuss this business stuff and the disappointment of the business stuff.
Yeah, because not only is it just about that constant growth, they're also trying to sell these things to cities.
Yes,
they're trying to sell these lesser name pay-per-views to cities. So something like the Elimination Chamber, not a traditional named pay-per-view that you'd see ever in a stadium, is now being sold as a stadium brand. We're now seeing that for Survivor Series in Petco Park in San Diego.
2 night Survivor Series.
No, one Survivor
night
Series.
I can't
SummerSlam 2 nights in MetLife.
I knew there was an S1, motherfucker.
But, that sort of show. So 2 nights in MetLife, you're hoping the first year you can be carried by, being New York, New Jersey, tri-state market. And the fact that when they did WrestleMania 35, when their product was in a downturn, they sold that show out instantly. So that's kind of their hope in that one. But when you're trying, so those type of markets, okay, you're going to put a show in, like a stadium show in London, or you're going to put a stadium show in New York, you're probably going to be able to make it work. 2 nights in Minnesota, 2 nights in a night in San Diego, they are much bigger challenges, and they have to sell these shows. It's not enough for these to do okay. Because, when you look at that number, so the final number that WrestleTix had for that Elimination Chamber show was 37,538. And 12 days out, which was just before The Rock got involved, when he turned up in New Orleans, they were at 27,544. So, they sold basically 10,000 tickets in those last 12 days, which was like 25%. It was 26.6. Let's do it properly. 26.6% of the venue, which is much higher. So I went back and I looked at like SummerSlam, the Cleveland Browns Stadium. And that was like 15% in the last few days. I looked at the Elimination Chamber in Perth, and you're looking much less, like 12%. And then the Royal Rumble in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, you're looking at 18%. So there is an argument that The Rock did add things to that. But when you look at it, when they did Put It On Is Old As Grey As Me, they did a Raw back in '99 in the Rogers Center, just a Raw, not a pay-per-view or anything, a Raw. And they drew 41,432. So, 41,000. And then that was 38,000 paid. So, I think, for them, they would have been looking to break that number, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And they didn't.
Nope.
And as much as it's crazy to think that 37,000 people in a stadium would be a failure, but in some parts to them, it's a failure.
Yes.
And it's the same reason why when they did the Vegas numbers, the first night, it was weird because the first night they didn't announce a number that was bigger than the Super Bowl number, which is what everyone expected. And then the second night they did, because that was always going to be the big thing. We want to be bigger than the Super Bowl, right?
Yes.
So this is the thing, and it's not, and the normal thing with wrestling is, so when you talk about what companies have done in the past is when you're hot, you raise ticket prices. That's always been like, and then when you aren't hot, you lower ticket prices to get people through the door. And that's been like the traditional thing throughout time. But we're now seeing this situation where they cannot lower ticket prices.
They can't.
They can. And because they have to keep delivering in all senses of the business. And that's what puts the extra pressure on the booking and leads to more kind of your shock booking, your quick turns. You're bringing people in just for pops, kind of, you do a debut, and then like machine guns. They don't even wrestle on WrestleMania, they do the Street Profit matches on SmackDown.
Yep.
You know, you're going to see more and more of that sort of stuff because it's the same thing that AEW were doing in 2022. It's like the quick hits because you're trying to elongate the success period, but they can't afford to do that. It has to keep going up and keep going up. And, you know, that's where when you have a power struggle over the booking, and that's what this is.
Yes.
It's, you know, everyone's going to talk around it other than Wade Keller this week, it seems.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a fucking power struggle. Like, we don't have to pretend that's not what it is. We don't have to act like maybe these guys don't like each other. They fucking hate each other's guts. They've hated each other's guts for fucking 30 years. Like, they're both doing specific things to try and fuck the other guy over, and we can see it in real time. So pretending that it's not happening or acting like we're not really sure, you fucking know that's what's happening. Come on. Do it, like, be realistic and be honest about what's going on in front of you.
But it's also that. It's just, but this Rock thing. So then immediately, you know, you come out of WrestleMania and everyone's like, where's the Rock? And a lot of people a lot of people kind of missed the fact that the company were building him up right before the show. So it's like, so they played an element in this. This wasn't just, Rock, you know, decided Elimination Chamber he wasn't going to be part of it. And he says, you know, I phoned Cena and I phoned Cody and said it's all about your time. And as Wade Keller said this week, who, you know, him and Dave have been reporting quite similar things all the way through this process. He just doesn't get aggregated as much. But, you know, he's done a lot of audio this week. So I'm using him as a good example. But as he said, you know, a lot of people in WWE have taken that as he took his ball and went home, essentially. Like, I'm not getting my way creatively. I'm not going to take Cody out, which he could have done, but it's not going to be worth it politically right now. It's like, so he just went, right, I'm not going to be involved then. And then he didn't promote WrestleMania at all from Elimination Chamber onwards, after doing all the kind of crap that he was talking in the Elimination Chamber post press conference, where they did separate press conferences. It was like having two power leaders on the same stage. He did his own press conference in New Orleans. You know, like, if you can't see the elements of kind of two forces here, I don't know what to think, because he's literally right in front of you, and now it's exploded onto the scene. So this guy, you know, one of the most powerful guys in the industry, you know, the friend of Ari Emanuel, of Nick Khan, and, you know, on the board of directors, Triple H isn't. And it's like, he's not going to take, you know, getting all this kind of feedback like, you know, you ruined WrestleMania, and not say something. So he goes out and he says, I was never supposed to be involved. Like, you know, I'd leave it up to them. And there's an element of, yes, actually, they should have come up with something better. You're telling me that people haven't pivoted in the part and been able to come up with something. You know, Triple H can't say anything. You know, the Daniel Bryan thing was something they fell into. They came up with a story, they delivered a great story. You can do that. That's what you're supposed to be able to do. You can't blame everything on The Rock about this story. You can blame some of the follow-up and that he wasn't there and understand why he wasn't there, but you can't blame the entire story on it because the work was shit to start with. Okay? The work, the creative, the direction, you know, and then saying, it'd be better if Cena had turned at Mania. Would it? What were you going to do beforehand? Would you have come up with something creatively fulfilling before that? You know, I can't be sure, because what we've seen shows me I don't think you would. I don't think there's any difference. The big thing here is they did this angle where people were talking about it being like, you know, one of the biggest angles of all time, like Hogan and the NWO or whatever, without realising that it probably doesn't really fit in where we are in the time scale, because those big angles tend to be about, you know, place and time just as much as about kind of what you actually do. And then the follow-up was bollocks. You didn't have an immediate follow-up. You waited 3 weeks. So whether The Rock was there or not, you still waited 3 weeks. You know?
Well,
and then,
it feels like the follow-up was what they planned to do originally, and they just did it with Cena being a heel instead of being the face person that they planned on him being, right? It didn't seem like there was any kind of like, you know, they didn't take into account what had happened. It was like, this is the plan. This is going to be our plan. We're going to stick with our plan regardless, right? No explanation is for this heel turn. No change in behavior from Cody. Just like, you know, you people promos and like, I'll make, you know, we'll figure something out. Like just weird. Like you said, you can blame The Rock for saying we didn't plan to turn Cena at Elimination Chamber, right? But we did plan to turn him at Mania, so we've moved it up a little bit. You can't incorporate that, like you said, into the build to the matches. All you can do is just sit back and wait and maybe see what Dwayne wants to do. Like, come on.
And that's not to say he's not disruptive, right? Because of course
he is.
And he's been many years. You know, someone reminded me on our Discord about him like doing segments with Ronda Rousey back in the 2010s and expecting that the tag match with him and Ronda versus Triple H and Stephanie ended up being Kurt Angle on that Raw WrestleMania 34. This has been going on for years. He's like, am I going to be there and I'm not? When he turned up at Bad Blood, but with actual no plans and turned the whole card around. It's like those sort of things. He does all these sort of things, but while he's useful to the business, he's going to be able to continue to do these sorts of things. So right now, like Triple H, looks like the better guy, and it's like, no, both of you are responsible for some of this shit. And you will continue to be, because the other thing that got you where you were was there was this impetus that people were pulling the load together.
Right.
And it's gone. It's now shot to pieces. And there's not even like a pretend anymore, because everyone can fucking see it now. And once you do that, that's so dangerous. It makes you question everything. And not everything now can be put onto The Rock, but people are going to be looking at booking so much closer now. They're not going to have as much capital in the bank as what they did, because you built them up for something and then you delivered a disappointing result, a majorly disappointing result in this weekend. And The Rock, he's, he probably did pull his ball and go home. That's probably the most likely explanation of all of them. It's like, you can tell his ego got hurt. He and Brian Dewitz's like tweets are just a joke, because he's basically admitting all the things that were said. And then he goes back on, and what's the guy from Busted Open? David
LaGreca.
LaGreca, thank you. And he goes on his and be like, oh, enjoy the ride. It's all a work and that sort of thing. And it's just like, I get it. Your ego got touched, but you are not knowing it. Like, have you not got like a PA or something like that, or some PR person who could just tell you, I don't think this is a good idea. You're looking like even worse than you were.
Yeah, but guys like this don't hire people who tell them no.
Oh, true.
I feel like if Rock had a PR person, he fired him a long time ago, because he's made a bunch of mistakes with some of his other stuff that like you can see it happening. I think you're right about him taking his shit and going home. I feel like Dave Meltzer had a very sort of brief aside during Wrestling Observer Radio where he said something about Rock being incredibly powerful, and then sort of said something about not being able to make Cody do what he wanted him to do, which sort of suggested that Rock, was very powerful, but maybe not all powerful, and that was part of the frustration that happened there.
Possibly, yeah. And it's very clear that he wanted Cody to turn, which,
yes,
as Wade Keller pointed out, that points to how kind of disconnected he is to the product and how much damage that you can do in that aspect. And we don't know yet. We don't know what damage that does. We will see, and you probably don't see straight away either. You can be carried on moments and the quick hits for a little while, but it will have an effect. And if they go back to then Cody picking that belt back up at the end of the year, will that be some ultra triumph, or will it just be kind of something else that happens? Have you lost that magic with him? Have you destroyed that thing by doing what you did? Because there are consequences, and this whole thing, wins and losses don't matter. But it's not. It's about how you present someone, and they did the most to make him presented well. And now we've kind of scuppered that and missed all this kind of power politics, and they got away with it last year. And I think that made them overconfident as well. Like, we can just fix it, and I don't think they did. But yeah, you can see that kind of the disruption as long as it continues, and it will continue. So Triple H has won the battle. He's not won the war. And this has got many chapters to go in terms of this power struggle between the two units. And when he's on Instagram and he's writing things and he doesn't include him and he's like TJP with Jeff Cobb, it's like, come on now. It's like, this is like child's play. But yeah, you're just exposing that this is all going on, And it's...
Well, it's funny because night one of Mania, like most of the matches were a disappointment, but the first night main event, everybody was talking about really positive, came out feeling really good. Everything was great, right? Night two of Mania, there was a big disappointment in how people talked about it, but then it went into Raw, and even though Raw sounded like a nightmare, it seemed like most of the people who like and watch WWE really liked Raw, thought it was great, thought it was interesting. And then Tuesday, you roll right into Rock on Pat McAfee, and now that's all that anybody can talk about, right? We're not talking about like the positives anymore. We're talking about the negatives and the shoot stuff and the behind the scenes stuff. And we saw this with AEW. It's that's the beginning of the end, right? Like,
and look, they're going to continue to be a highly successful company. Their business brains will continue to drive additional sponsorship. But as soon as there is a real challenge to their attendance numbers or to their, and that will happen first before before ratings, because that's always where it goes first. That's going to be a huge challenge to them, and they are going to start doing more dramatic things to counter that. They are, and it's not going to be lowering pricing. So we are going to see more of this. And I think, you know, everything that kind of happened around that. So what I do want to ask you is, so going into WrestleMania, before The Rock did what The Rock did on Tuesday, I was having a bit of a discussion with Brian Zellum over the Torch about this media strategy that you talked about at the start, all these appearances, all these comments, you know. Do you think this was a strategy, or do you think this was just people not being kind of corralled in a PR sense?
I have two, like, my gut wants to answer yes and no simultaneously, right? Like, so on the one hand, it seemed so coordinated that it's hard not to think that it wasn't a strategy, right? Like, in some ways, especially a lot of the Trump references felt very planted and coordinated. On the flip side, all of it was so poorly done and so tone deaf in a lot of ways that, you know, I kind of think maybe this was just masks off people behaving the way that they are who we thought they were, right? But I also think that, like, where I as a human being look at some of the things that people said that week and think, God, these people are fucking disgusting. If I'm these people, I think that, you know, other people agree with me. I think that I'm, you know, the winner. I'm right. I'm, you know what I mean? Like, you know, MAGA is reigning supreme. This is our audience. This is who we should cater to. Just like the, you know, we want to be the MAGA chuds and the chads, the UFC chads that, like, this is their audience. This is what we want. So I'm kind of torn on that one. I could see a yes or a no on this.
I see, because it's difficult because you see, you emphasize something that I keep saying quite frequently lately, but it's hard for me to accept, let alone anybody else, is sometimes we have to accept that right now we are not in the majority. And, you know, that doesn't change how we look at something morally, but it can change how companies react. And we've seen that, you know, numerous companies since the Trump administration has come in, and with much lesser ties to this administration than what TKO have. Right. And it's also a case of, you know, the general consensus, if you know, with wrestling fans in general at the moment, you know, if you go to an independent show, you go anywhere, is that WWE is this kind of cool product. There is that thing that does happen. You know, even when we went to Rev Pro last week, you know, someone shouting at Mercedes, it's just some idiots in that crowd at times. It was just like, this isn't Las Vegas. And it's like that thing that you should be there. That's where you should, you know, there's still that to overcome. So they can play into that. But I did, you know, and the same with, like, when they did the El Grande Americano stuff and the crowd, like, cheered the Gulf of Mexico stuff, which they're now saying they weren't, Gulf of America stuff, but they're saying they weren't supposed to say. It's like, and then, he beat the Mexican on the big stage because, you know, whenever he gets that win back, whenever Mexican wrestler gets that win back, it'll be on a smaller stage and everyone will claim it was great. But actually on the big stage, we made the racist gimmick win. It's always the same. Just drives me crazy. But it's like, what I did find interesting, though, did you see Dana White got completely booed every time they showed him? And his face was like, he didn't know how to take it. So they obviously didn't expect that. No. And I think, did Colby Covington get booed as well? I think he did. So these people that are kind of, they probably hoped that audience with that, but then you've got Romania as more of your travelling audience, which is more, you know, the travelling from abroad are more traditionally left-wing than right.
Even Hogan got booed, right? Like, you know, like, it's not like there's this universal support for some of this stuff, right?
No, and I think you're risking it. You're risking it by playing into one side because it all works for you now, potentially, but you know, when you link yourself politically to an administration, you know, if that changes, if, you know, feeling towards that administration changes, say, if, like, for example, we had a great example here, you know, if you had linked yourself to the Tory administration, you know, going into COVID, the Boris Johnson era, you know, you probably look great in 2019, 3 years later, you don't look so great when everyone's chanting, you know, fuck the Tories, every sporting event even, you know. So you have to be very, very careful with that stuff. And I think they've lost that now, and whether that's a deliberate play or not, but you're running risks, and I don't see the need to run risks when you need to kind of incorporate intense growth on a constant basis. You know, why do you keep chipping away at these things that made you, you know, hot in the first place after years of kind of downturn?
Well, I think this becomes that thing that you see with a lot of powerful, you know, white men, to be honest, although I think it's something that you see bleed over into non-white men, to be honest, is that, like, this didn't happen because of things we did. This happened because we're geniuses, and nothing we do could ever cause this to be bad, right? Because we're geniuses, we don't make mistakes, right? And I mean, you look at these people, and if there's anybody who you could see having that mindset, it's obviously fucking Triple H, right? Like,
well, his elimination chamber press conference, does it feel like the road to WrestleMania now?
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Like, yeah. So it's like, so I think that's a big piece of this. It's like you can't envision that this is, and then like you said, you got a lot of people coming out of the woodwork. You've got guys like Cena who are, here for whatever, right? And I don't need to do any work on it. It's just going to be great because I'm great. Like, I don't know. Like, it also felt to me, and this is my question to you, I felt like seeing now and knowing that Donald Trump did not show up at WrestleMania, part of me feels like they were trying to court getting him there.
The Pat McAfee stuff certainly felt like that, didn't it?
It did. It really did. Like, that was the thing where I was like, because I think I would not have been shocked if he had showed up. I was sort of expecting it. I think we talked about it at one point where I was like, of course he's showing up, right? And so I wonder if a lot of those Trump conversations and pieces that they, mentioned weren't trying to say, hey, we'd love to have you. Like, we'd love to have you make an appearance.
Quite possibly. It's an interesting one. And it's one of them that I don't know, especially internationally, I don't think that would be a breaker in anyone's fandom or what they thought. But it definitely felt like a political play in terms of, we want this guy at our event. And it's, like he does at UFC. He goes to how many UFC shows a year? So,
right.
Yeah, and he didn't. So it's a strange thing to do. We'll see if it continues. We'll see if they continue that alignment to promote that alignment. And, they'll get away with things like the Paul Heyman thing by saying it's all just shock jock character stuff.
He's a heel. He's a heel, Trish. Heels are racist and sexist. And eventually, eventually someone will beat Paul Heyman in a wrestling match. And he'll get his comeuppance. Like, fuck you. Fuck you.
Yeah, it's bollocks. And it's the same with, they do this roast thing, and that's a dangerous sort of play. And if they continue to play into stuff like that, because then you have something that you say, oh, won't get out, and obviously it will, because it's pro wrestling, everything gets out. And it's like, oh, we're going to not just kind of, when people do a roast, it's like the idea is that somebody signs up to agree to have it happen, to have the jokes on them. And you're going to make a series of kind of, racist, misogynistic, homophobic jokes, and you're going to make them on people that aren't there, that aren't even part of your company in some kind of
impact. So this is another thing I feel like we're not explaining it enough for people who do not follow WWE. But like basically this was a private WWE sponsored event hosted by Tony Hinchcliffe, who is, according to some, the premier roast comedian of 2025, who these folks went to the theater. They had to put their phones in the special bags, which is always a sign that somebody is going to be fucking an asshole. And then they had WWE stars and other comedians on stage doing comments, capped off at the end by Triple H coming out and doing jokes. But the problem was that the only woman from WWE who was there was Nia Jax. And the jokes that were the quote unquote jokes, I say, because the whole thing was leaked, right? And it's out. There's audio of it out there. You can listen to it if you want to. It's floated around the internet. At this point, if you want it, you can find it. Even though WWE are doing everything they fucking can do to get it taken down, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't advise to do so. If you can not. Probably
listen to it. If you really want to listen to it, you can. But like, it's fucking. Why would you want to? Right? It's fucking garbage. And this is the part where it's like, when you do a roast, and like traditionally, like roasts go back to like the fucking years and years and years ago. They got famous on TV with like the celebrity roasts of Dean Martin, where like all of the Rat Pack from the '60s would show up on stage drunk and make jokes and talking to each other. It became a thing that Comedy Central did in the 2000s. That became a famous thing, and now it's like we have roast comedians. But the problem is with the roast comedians and like a lot of edgelord bullshit humor these days. The idea is that you're not going to actually make jokes. You're just going to say racist and sexist and homophobic and transphobic things at the expense of people who are sitting there, right? Which on the one hand is fine because, like Trish said, you go to this thing, you know exactly what it is, and you know the kind of shit you're going to put up with, right? The problem is that when they did this roast for WrestleMania, they took a lot of jokes at the expense of people who weren't physically there, right? So Miz was there, but his wife Maurice wasn't there, but there was joke after joke after joke about how Maurice has a big vagina, right? Which is, great. It's a suggestion that she fucks a lot of guys. Hey, this woman's a slut. Ironically, Maurice had a major issue with precancerous tumors that she had to have removed, and like did a whole thing on that, which is another disgusting part of what that was. At one point, somebody made a joke about Jinder Mahal, who not only wasn't at the event, doesn't work for WWE anymore. Made a joke about him being part of ISIS, even though Jinder Mahal is a Sikh. And like, it wouldn't be an acceptable joke if he was Muslim, but like, Jesus fucking Christ, right? Like, there was jokes about Shayna Baszler having a penis. Again, Shayna Baszler not fucking physically present, right? So again, like, people be like, oh, it's edgy, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not somebody, and I've said this numbers of time on this podcast, I'm not somebody who ever thinks that shit needs to be off limits in comedy, right? Like, I've heard funny jokes about rape, right? I've heard funny jokes about rape. I'm going to say that. I didn't say funny rape jokes. Funny jokes about rape and sexual assault. It's not uncommonly weird that these jokes have usually been said by women comedians, but they're out there, right? So I think there's shit that you can do with these kind of topics that are quote unquote taboo that you can make funny. But when it's just like fucking saying shit like, oh, she has a penis, where's the joke there? There's no joke there, right? Like, that's not even something I would say about a really close friend because it's not fucking funny. Like, that's the part that was disgusting. So yes, WWE doesn't want any of this shit out because it's fucking gross. And like I said in the intro, Sami Zayn, happy to sit up there and laugh along. So I don't really want to hear any discussions about, like, he's secretly a good guy. Like, you know, he doesn't like any of this stuff, right? Like, it's just bullshit. So this is who they are. This is what I was talking about. This mask is off, right? If you were trying to kid yourself that, like, this is a different company, these are different people, they showed you this week what the fuck they were. Like, they showed you this week. You had Paul Heyman went on Pat McAfee and, like, the least, like, he was awful. And, like, don't give me this heel heat bullshit, right? He's not going to do a match with somebody. Like a fucking Hispanic guy's not going to beat him in the ring. Like, fuck you. I just, like, this is the kind of stuff where it's like, and people want to make excuses for it because we saw a lot of that last week, right? We had CM Punk be like, oh, you're on Twitter. You're on Elon Musk's Twitter. Yes, my having a Twitter account is the same as you getting paid millions of dollars by WWE. You know, oh, I do a lot of charitable stuff. I just don't do it where you can see it. Give me, sure, okay. Yeah, fine, right? We had people talking about how, like, well, you know, if you watch WWE and you still continue to watch them after Saudi Arabia and after Owen Hart and after Janelle Grant, then you should know what you signed up for. Like, you could stop any time, right? You could call out sexism and racism any time. Like, just because maybe I didn't call out sexism and racism last year doesn't mean that it's like, well, I can never call it out. Like, we'll accept converts to, like, being a normal and good human being at any point. You know, like, that's the kind of stuff that makes me nuts is when people create this false equivalency bullshit about some of this shit, right? Like, you can call out stuff for being disgusting and garbage. And it, like, quite frankly, when you do it, it makes the people who the jokes are aimed at feel a little bit better, right? If you don't feel like wrestling is a place for you because you're a woman or a minority or gay, right? And so you hear these jokes and you hear these comments and you're like, well, this isn't a community that wants me. Somebody saying, hey, I don't think that's funny might make you feel a little bit better. So, like, I'm sorry if it makes you feel bad that your heroes are assholes, but, like, suck it up and deal with it like the rest of us. Ugh, I'm just...
It has the roast thing has another kind of downside as well, and I think we've seen some impact of this at the end of the week, because some of these jokes made towards other performers, you know, aren't really jokes, they're kind of targeted shots. And this is an industry full of people who are insecure, because the nature of this business is that you have to be insecure. You have to be insecure about your spot. You have to be insecure about your appearance because of the expectation. You have to be insecure about what you say, what you do, you know, how you speak to people. You know, are you too outgoing or, you know, too quiet? All these things, you are judged on absolutely everything you do, and that leads to a natural insecurity because of the way everything works. And all you're doing is playing on that and causing tension within your own locker room and your own staffing. And that never has, you know, any good... It
doesn't end well.
No, and, you know, that's just going to lead to additional problems down the road.
Want to keep your personal number private but still stay connected? With Line 2, you can get a second phone line right on your device with a super simple app and no need for another phone. Whether it's for online shopping, dating, or shielding your main number from spam, Line 2 is an easy way to manage it all. Ready for peace of mind without breaking the bank? Call, text, block, and more for only $9.99. Get started with line2.com/audio or download Line 2 in any app store today. Line 2, your second line simplified.
You know, this roast is one of a number of kind of multiple events as these weeks kind of expand and become just giant things with event after event after event, because you need to have deals with this venue and that venue and this venue, and, you know, and it's just like that's the other thing, is that it's like a flooding of the market is again, but in a really short kind of window, which I think is why it's felt so impactful, because then when that kind of goes away from kind of one line, you feel it everywhere, because there's stuff being said everywhere. There's things going on everywhere, and, and never mind when you watch the broadcast and they're shoving, 28 ads at you in like every 5 minutes and it's on demand. It's like this kind of whirlwind of stuff, that everything that just takes away from what's supposed to be your kind of pinnacle event in the ring each year.
Well, that's the part that I think if you weren't paying attention to this, and God, I wish I could be you, but like you said, the overwhelming nature of it, like the entire week, it just every time you turned around, there was another headline. Oh, Triple H praises, Donald Trump, right? Nick Khan is, we're the underdog. Roman Reigns says Trump's a charismatic guy. Like you couldn't get away from it, because every freaking half hour it was like there was another press release. And like you talked about the flooding of the events, this is another piece when we talk about the strategy they have to have from a business perspective. They have to figure out new ways of making money for these events, and this kind of shit is that. This is why you're going to continue to see advertisements fucking everywhere during these shows. And I imagine at some point they're going to move away from just being on WrestleMania and start infecting more of like the actual television programming. They already are, but even more. Like you had like Mania, for those of you that didn't watch, they had sponsored entrances, right? They had sponsored matches, right? Wasn't there dude wipes? Like wipe your ass with dude wipes, because, women and men can't have the same fucking toilet paper, because that's like wiping your ass with a wipe for a woman. That's gay, right? Like that's just not manly. Men don't do that. You have to have a wipe for men, and the wipe for men doesn't have lotion on it, because God forbid anything like that touch your butthole. Like just stupid ass shit like that. But they had a match that was fucking sponsored by dude wipes. Like what's wrong?
Sarah versus Dude Wipes, the feud of 2025.
There are some things that I'm like, yes, certain things should be gendered, right? I am fine with certain things being gendered, absolutely. But some stuff being gendered is the stupidest. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, that's the kind of shit that it's like, men, is it gay to love a woman?
Oh, the flooding of the market stuff. I'm just going to take it away.
Please do, before I start going down a rabbit hole of horrors.
With the flooding of the market stuff, and the flooding of like the media and all these events and everything going on, and sponsorships and that sort of thing, it's all part of their strategy. And the other thing is, Nick Khan talked about it on his appearance, is they want to start flooding other markets, because they know the American market, it cannot sit there. And that's why I think we've seen so many shows, the house show thing, everything has kind of slowed down there. So you have the American shows, the idea is they be destination shows, but then you increase your kind of global thing. And he talked about the markets they're trying to hit. They're trying to hit India for the millionth time. A promoter is trying to break India. And then they come up with stupid like percentages on like, oh, we increased viewership by 114%. Yeah, when we lost 20 million viewers and we gained 12. Okay, maths, 12 maximum, and it won't be 12, because as we've seen by raw numbers, it's not even close to any sort of impact like that from India. But it's like, yeah, the maths doesn't add up, but we just make numbers up now, because we don't actually have to give actual numbers anymore. We can just say, it was up by this percentage, it was up by that percentage. You might as well fucking write whatever you want on a piece of paper and then just stick it up in the air and hold it. But the idea is that they want to break these global markets so you have more options in terms of these sort of things. So yeah, they want to India, they're talking about Brazil, which would match, what UFC do. MMA is huge, in Brazil, and that's been a market they've trying to be expanding. And then he talked about Mexico.
Dun, dun, dun. Let's get into it, Trish. Let's get into it.
So, so in Saturday Night 1, just beforehand, they announced a few hours before that they were going to do a show with AAA. NXT and AAA show what we've called When Worlds Collide, famous WCW pay-per-view name back in the 90s, and they're going to do it at the Kia Forum before the Money in the Bank show at the Intuit Dome. Okay, and that felt like, something that they normally do. So you have CML announcing their Fantastic Mania week, which is going to include an AEW ROH versus CML show on the Tuesday, and you have the announcement of Fantastic Mania to include, New Japan, Rev Pro, and AEW and Ring of Honor on the Friday. And then obviously the big one, the TV tapings on the Wednesday with AEW there. You know, first TV
at Arena Mexico.
And as our friend Daniel, who's it was great seeing him, so excited yesterday. As he said to us, you know, it's the first TV tapings they've had there in 14 years, so 2011. It's definitely over a decade. So it's a huge deal. And this is very much like, you know, when they got jumped for All In, when AEW ran Wembley and they didn't see it coming.
Yep.
And, you know, there was a market where they could sense that there was, you know, a big, you know, an opportunity there because, you know, you knew what you had there with the previous indie audience, you know what your viewership is there, and, you know, you had obviously you've got ITV coverage there over the top platform, and it's like, and then with Fight, Triller, whatever you want to call it. So you have like that undercurrent. It's the same. So how many people have gone to, AEW people have gone to Arena Mexico and they've had like strong sellouts or they've done really well. So you knew that you potentially had this giant audience there for a taping, especially then it's the thing of having an American TV taping in Arena Mexico as well. Yep. So they basically got there quicker. So WWE were talking about, we want to do something in Mexico and that, but hadn't got there. And AEW had kind of undercut them in a way. Well, not to them, but to WWE's eyes, right? So then it's like we have to respond. So all of a sudden, this acceleration of whatever was going on between them and AAA, and it's, we're going to do a show, and it's going to be literally like right around the same time period. It's going to be in LA. We're going to go, and we thought that was it, and that was something in itself because, you know, it was like, well, who have you got that's big enough that you could hold a show in like the Kia Forum? We've just seen NXT in Las Vegas, you know, right before WrestleMania, not do that great.
Nope.
In fact, we unfortunately we can't even get an estimate. Hopefully we get a poster number on that so we can get an idea of what the pay was. But it didn't look, you know, I think WrestleTix estimates it's kind of like 7,000 to 8,000 somewhere. So it's like you have that. So you think you have this success. And I know they've just brought back you got the new version of the La Parker character. Is that enough? I don't really think so. You know, is there anyone else on the roster that's really that strong? And it's like, it's kind of a bare bones. Is there people that would work that show? And you think, okay, they're going to have to use Penta and Phoenix. But even then, you're kind of looking, I don't really know what we've got here. But it's all about, to me, that always looked like we want the news cycle, right? So we can't disrupt them ticket sales in Mexico City for AEW. They've got the jump on us the same way that they did with All In London. So what we're going to do is we're going to disrupt that news coverage because WWE is seen as the top dog in Mexico. You know, it's seen as you haven't made it until you've got to WWE, and we're going to play on that because we're going to team with AAA. It's like this, you know, it's like a shocking development, and we thought that would be it. And we were like, okay, we can see why they've done it. It's similar things that they've done elsewhere. It's the same way that, you know, as soon as AEW do anything in Europe, there's this immediate challenge to it. Yep. And the same with the independents. You know, when the UK independents were getting too strong, or when we had something like when they tried to do the World of Sport remake on ITV, straight away there was an immediate challenge to it. That's how NXT UK became a thing. So that's kind of their normal standard behaviour, and that's gone back decades. They've always done shit like that. And then we get to the pre-show, and then all of a sudden there's like a press conference thing, and it's like they're all outside, and they say they're buying AAA. And I remember I just got a message, and I was like, what the fuck? Because you can't believe it in numerous ways as well. And it's not just like, I think we thought that everyone was protected better out of TKO and the antitrust lawsuit, and especially with MLW and what happened there. But maybe that's just in the US, I don't know. But I think we felt that false security, and we shouldn't, because if you remember back to when Stephanie McMahon started doing press again, I know Triple H said this last week, you know, when she was on Pat McAfee, and she said, and he asked her about global expansion, and she went, oh no, it's still very much on, and that should have been a warning curve. But AAA are also, in the nicest possible way, a lot of times a fucking mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you start to wonder, you know, this is not a company, and I know Conan's out on his podcast that ended up going behind a paywall because he's in trouble already. But it's like, I know he's out there saying, oh, you know, we just needed some investment and we were never in financial trouble. It's like, you don't contract wrestlers. So both Rob Viper and Lucha Blog think that there's 13 wrestlers under contract. You know, a lot of other wrestlers are used on a, you know, local basis. Yeah, they're just brought in and now. You could see it during like the pandemic and it was great for me because it was all like the Monterey kind of indie guys, you know, the areas of Toxins, the Latter girls were just kind of all over like the TV, and it was fantastic because the matches were so much better. But it's like, that's not what they wanted. It's because they really couldn't afford to do much else. And then there's also been this thing of, God, I can't think about how many times I've heard them go, you know, we need investment, or we're getting this investor or this backer, or Conan does it before every major event in Mexico. Like, and it's like, you just see it in circles. But then as you see it, like everything kind of gets smaller. You know, from a live viewership, international viewership perspective, you could see it quite clearly when they stopped broadcasting on Triller or anything like that. They stopped putting kind of live commentary on from people in the building. So instead, you get this commentary from home where you only literally get through that commentary mic. So you can't hear the crowd, which is fucking pointless if you're going to watch Mexican wrestling and you can't hear the crowd. But yeah, it's not felt like a promotion that is well run or something that you would put money into thinking you were going to make money. And so that was so much of a shock. But then you look at it and you think, if they want to be kind of controlling the global market, then it may be a risk they're willing to take, because what they get is, you know, doing something like NXT Mexico would be fucking stupid, because that's a black hole. But instead, you know, you don't get any buildings out of this. They are not like CMLL. They don't own any buildings.
Right.
But they own a name, and the name is still, you know, a brand name, AAA in Mexico. And then you get kind of their infrastructure. But mostly you get the ability to be disruptive. So, you know, you can play around, you know, they have a deal, and maybe some of the things that have happened this year with AAA make more sense now. So the stuff where they kind of disappear from space for a couple of weeks, the TV network, if you've ever watched a show like those, like every advert's like, on space, it's great. And Max, you know, so they've got two other platforms, you know. Does that mean they want to move up to Netflix or something to shop around, or is it something that they've now got, you know, more different platforms that they can talk about WWE on? Is it a case of, you know, you can put money into there, and you don't need to put money into AAA in terms of what they're doing as their shows, you know, their TV booking or their kind of their major shows in terms of, like, I don't know, huge production elements or whatever. But you can do a little bit of that. But also what you can do is you can pay people more than what they probably get, and it doesn't cost you a fortune, and you're going to get something back of that if you keep the Mexican system, which we'll talk about momentarily. Because, you know, it's not like NXT UK where you're just putting money into something and nothing's coming back. So it's less of a risk than that in a way, but it just allows you to be disruptive. So what are you going to do? You know, Mexican system, so AAA is not just, oh, we have shows and we have 13 contracted wrestlers and then we get other people. It's like we rent a lot of these people out. So that sounds awful, doesn't it? But we rent people out. But essentially we do. So you have loads of local promoters, and the local promoters will, you know, put AAA banners on stuff, and they will say, can I have, I don't know, today I have Psycho Clown. I know he's not contracted, but it works the same because it's the gimmick. Can I have Pagano? Can I have whoever? And they'll put on the shows, and these are like the lifeblood of Mexican wrestling. You can get 3,000-5,000, you know, in some of these venues. And then AAA takes a cut of whatever that show makes. And then those performers, if they say, you know, say even if like, Psycho Clown's a good one because he has, you know, the AAA gimmick or whatever. So if he goes and works another show somewhere, like wherever it is, you know, he gives a portion of his money to AAA because he's used a AAA gimmick. He's in that character while he works there. And so there is this secondary income that comes into AAA, probably, you know, equal or maybe more than what they get from running shows themselves, that you then put at risk. And then you get into it's very much similar to the UK thing that could be damaging the most, is what happens if they sign, say WWE sign, I don't know, the 13 guys that are on there, and some of them might be controversial, and then sign, I don't know, 20 others from that scene, you know, people that are used regular. Then what? Are they going to be able to continue to do what they do? Is it if they're on like the 40 grand US deal sort of thing, equivalent in pesos, you know, is it that you don't now wrestle anywhere else? Or are you controlled in terms of where you wrestle? Are they just going to say no fees completely? We're just going to change the model completely, and we're going to, you know, interrupt the entirety of the kind of the country and how Lucha Libre works in Mexico underneath the two big companies. You know, because that is exactly what they did in the UK, and that's that sort of disruption that can majorly damage an industry without anybody seeing it. It's all done kind of underneath the surface. But you then take out all those things and you make it that your development thing, you make AAA your development show, or your show where they can achieve star status in Mexico under the WWE banner. But also you're wiping out this whole ecosystem underneath, and that, you know, will also make it harder for CMLL. Never mind the fact that they're not a bidding, as Lucha Boxers, they're not a bidding war company. If they start getting offered more money to go to AAA, people will go to AAA. You know, despite the fact that AAA is AAA and CMLL were putting on, you know, fantastic shows and are selling out buildings across the country. It's not just tourism and Arena Mexico. Jesus Christ.
Do you think that anyone at WWE has any idea that that's how the Mexican system works?
I think the reason why they've got a investment company in Mexico, and they'll probably use the TKO people that, you know, have been involved with UFC Mexico to try and understand that system. And at the moment, that's probably why they're keeping Conan. And the idea, you know, they put Jeremy, the suggestion is that Jeremy Borash will be involved in some way. And, you know, he's got some experience working, you know, between TNA and AAA or RRR back in, you know, 2010s and things. But it won't matter. I think you do have to consider, you know, will the government become more involved? Will other elements in Mexico become more involved? Because, you know, there's a cultural thing there. Rossetti is seeing kind of CMLL play into that.
Well, that was my question to you, right? Mm-hmm. And that was the flip side of, you know, with WWE and TKO going really hard on the Donald Trump MAGA train, does that then, you know, you've seen, like you said, with CMLL this week, you see they've started to promote themselves as 100% Mexican Lucha Libre. Yep. Is there become a point of national pride that suddenly it's like, well, you know, we're not going to support this. We're not. I mean, again, when it comes to money, people will do whatever, and we've seen that. And in some cases, you can understand why. But at the same time, like, are you going to? Is that become a piece of this that maybe it wasn't like if this happened 5 years ago?
And it could be because, you know, you're looking at essentially. So they've got this investment firm involved as well. It's kind of an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's kind of like a shadow thing. You know, there's a new Twitter going out, there's a new website going out, very basic. You know, they're saying they were involved in a couple of things last year. One of the things they were involved with had a little bit of a tie-in with AAA at the back of last year. So maybe, you know, you can see where things may have come from that. But there's no real kind of substance to what they are, so we don't know how that works. But the idea of having that Mexican firm is to stop that pushback to me. You know, it's very clear that WWE, you know, Conan can't not talk about things openly, can he, or just mess him up. So it's like just saying, oh yeah, you know, rather than saying this is just going to be, you know, we're going to keep AAA as AAA, and, you know, it's not traditional Lucha Libre. It was meant to not be traditional Lucha Libre in the first place. Right. But it's like the WWE line is we're going to keep it as traditional Lucha Libre. That's so it's Triple H's line at the press conference, the postgram, whatever you want to call it. And now it's like, no, we're going to make it into this American system where we get people ready for American wrestling, because that's the thing that holds them back in American wrestling, right? They're not WWE enough. What the fuck? What bollocks is that? That's no... yeah, we all wish, like, in a way, that was what kind of held people back, but it's not, is it? No. I also don't, because the danger for this is, so as much as this, WWE are pushing this thing, and they've been doing this, you know, this was a thing before AEW came into place, because they didn't want an AEW, right? So they want control of these global markets, and they were going market to market, and that's what we saw in the UK. The market was getting too competitive with WWE in the UK, and all of a sudden it's like, we need to wipe it out. So we're going to get inside, we're going to build our own thing, and we're going to be disruptive. And it doesn't matter that thing didn't succeed, because what it did was stop the UK from ever building to that level again. And now every time we even get close to anything, you know, they start picking people up. There's a lot of suspicion about some of the matches coming up next 2 weeks where, you know, all the tryouts that they had, they're going to start wiping it, you know, going to wipe out that top line in the UK scene. And there's always been an element of that, but it's much, much more kind of targeted now. And the idea is that this is what, you know, you expect to see in Mexico. It's not going to keep the same. Maybe you'll see the tapings the same. You've already seen the pricings going up. You know, they announced a Triple Mania regular show. Literally, like, they normally announce in January, and they announce it now because, well, we all know why that is. But it's like the prices go up, that sort of thing. They might keep them shows the same, but you create this kind of issue of all the undercurrent, and the idea is as well to damage what COL's success story is. You know, this is a company that every Friday night, potentially, are drawing a bigger crowd than what SmackDown is. No, they don't like that. You know, it's like, and the tourism thing kind of underplays it. Like, they see that as more of a threat. So what they're going to do is kind of disrupt it from inside. And it's like, oh, we're going to train everybody to be like what we want them to be in WWE. And it's like, so now we're going to reduce the styles. So we're already getting this problem now. And we've seen this over the last few years. It's like, you have to be this way to be successful in wrestling. And we're seeing this kind of pour into AEW a little bit with the more people that come in from kind of that side and the more the mindsets and the storytelling. And that's how you end up with some of the segments like Tunnel Talk covered last week, where that stuff's acceptable because it comes from WWE and it's that type of storytelling. And it doesn't matter that might cost them more women than blood or anything other fucking bollocks. But it's like these things become the accepted norm. And the more you kind of homogenize it, and the more this kind of becomes this proxy war that both have entered into, and AEW maybe not willingly at all times, but they are in this proxy war, and it kind of gobbles up parts of the globe, the more we kind of see less of like individual style, less of individual kind of character building, storytelling, all these people learning from experiencing the different cultures, from experiencing the different styles, picking up experience elsewhere. We're going to see less and less of that as more people get warehoused at an earlier age, and then they fail to progress. And then we just get, and that's why you have the kind of nostalgia and the hangers-on and all that sort of thing, because nobody is able to progress past that because they don't have the skills to, because there's nowhere to learn them, and that's the danger. So it's all right saying, oh, we're going to, and this is the same, what they said for what they want to do in Mexico is exactly the same thing that they said they want to do with WWID. Exactly the same thing. When they come through, we're going to train them in this way, we're going to do things in this way, and then they're all going to be the fucking same. One might wear a mask, one might not. They're going to be the fucking same. And then what have we got? And this is the same worry about Japan, if they try and go to Japan, and they will try and go to Japan in one way or another. Do I think they're buying New Japan? No. Okay. Do I think it's heavily likely, and they have tried to buy companies before. They tried to buy Stardom, they tried to buy All Japan before the pandemic. But they will keep trying to get in one way or another. And it doesn't have to be that they take over everything. It doesn't have to be this, monopoly anymore. They are quite happy being in some sort of fucking Cold War, as long as they can be disruptive and they can then, reduce the threat of that market to them, because that still allows them to be in that same position without having to take over everything. And it's so dangerous. And it's and it's hard because there's a tendency then to do this. I keep seeing this Naito comparison, right? And it's oh, New Japan, Stardom, Yusima, Ripper. Yeah. And it's this, if you are an AEW fan first and foremost, close your ears now, okay? Just close your fucking ears for 5 minutes. Not all parts of the world see AEW as a saviour. Not all companies in the world see AEW as a saviour either. They are also a threat to their business.
Yeah.
They don't see, and we saw it a little bit we discussed this a little bit when the Chris Charlton comments came out around Wrestle Kingdom. And it was people saying, oh, it's about Kevin Kelly, or he kind of went off on his own. No, it's because there are people in the office that don't feel particularly great around AEW. And especially when it came to Wrestle Dynasty, it kind of went public because Kadani was talking about, they didn't get a huge benefit out of this and they wonder about the value of the partnership. And that's not to mean there isn't a value or they're kind of out on it. But if you are, for example, someone in New Japan, there is no way that you can say that AEW's kind of invention or run has been good for your business. There isn't. It's not been good for your business, since 2019. Whether you were going to lose the elite or not, you went from being that secondary global company who was expanding to someone that, and then of course with the pandemic, who had to regress and is now struggling to keep an international foothold, as well as trying to rebuild your business in Japan. So it's and it's the same with other companies as well. So they don't look at AEW and see a saviour. They look at it and see something that they have to build a relationship with or keep relations with. Maybe some way it is similar to Naito in a way, because if you're an American, you maybe see Naito as this kind of big kind of provider. If you're a European, maybe you see it differently. But especially now, Jesus Christ, that actually kind of works right now. But yeah, it's that thing of they don't all see it as though, they don't see it as we need to work together against this force. They just think of what do we need to do for our business. And you can see that a lot with the US independents, because people keep wondering, why are they so close to WWE right now in so many of them? And for me, you know, I'd see it slightly differently, because people get really offended when I mention this. But it's like, if you go to these shows, their crowds are not anti-WWE.
No.
They have no issue with WWE. In fact, a lot of them embrace it more than they do AEW. So they don't lose anything as a business by that. And as much as it is dangerous, yes, it is always dangerous to get involved in any kind of relationship with WWE. We've seen that in the UK. But for them, sometimes they're adding up and going, okay, well, if we don't and we're on the outside, we're a target. And what is the value of doing these kind of little WWE ID matches or whatever on our shows compared to being a target to this company that is wiping people out and being as disruptive as possible? And that's the balance that a lot of them make.
Well, I think that's something that, like, you know, if you're a wrestling fan, you can understand, you should be able to understand why WWE, like AEW is not, like that was the thing you keep seeing, right? Like AEW needs to do this, right? WWE is buying AAA. And the response was not, you know, CMLL needs to do this, blah, blah. It was WWE and AEW needs to do this. AEW needs to do this. And I'm like, I don't know that that's a, like, how is that? It's not AEW's business in some way. Like, to some degree, they are partially responsible for this, but no, let me try and put my thought together.
No, it's like because it's a proxy war. It's coming to Mexico and to Japan and to all these other places because of this rivalry.
Yes, WWE is more threatened because of AEW's existence than they might have been in another situation.
And they will take that to other locations.
Correct.
But they will also always aiming at these things. It's not AEW's fault that they are looking at global expansion. They were looking at global expansion before
AEW showed.
But it is like a Cold War where the responses and the fallout are felt by others to what's happening between WWE and AEW.
Right. And you also have to acknowledge the fact that AEW has not always been a good partner, right? Like, you know, Collision happened and suddenly people are getting pulled from indie shows with very little notice that they'd been booked and stuff for it because AEW has not got its shit together because Tony Khan doesn't always know who he's going to have on the show until the fucking day before. And then he says, oh, I'm actually going to do this angle with this person, right? That's not great. Right?
No, you've got to fix that. You need to rebuild. And this is where, you know, there was a lot of response to the Dean announcement. You have to, if you're AEW and if you feel like this threat to this system, and it is a threat to you as well because your talent line is being affected. You know, you're only getting one style of wrestler could become a thing across the world.
Right.
And also, you know, you will have less access to them because they are being signed early. Then you need to start repairing some of these relationships and building more of your own. You can't just not...
No, there's always going to be an inherent tension when you have two promotions working together. It's just there's always, especially if one makes more money and is, you know.
That's the thing with CMLL. You know, CMLL were where New Japan were in 2020, 2019, 2020 in terms of relationship with AEW, where they're more on par. And it doesn't mean that CMLL obviously don't make anywhere close to the amount of money that AEW do. But in terms of how they are as a promotion, CMLL don't need AEW.
No.
Okay. So, you know, they can exchange talent. In fact, AEW are benefiting, you know, they're using them quite heavily in terms of live promotion at the moment to try and sell tickets.
Especially for Ring of Honor.
But they're bringing them in to try and boost live numbers to follow what MLW have been doing, their strategy. You know, following, you know, the Latino audience to bring them in to kind of boost to your suffering kind of live numbers in a number of markets. You know, Mystico, when he's come in, has drawn very well for them. So when they announce him, that LA one's still crazy. But yeah, so there is this kind of mutual beneficial relationship where it doesn't feel like, you know, AEW is lording essentially over CMLL. So you have that. Whereas that's not always been the case in the recent years with New Japan, and that's not how people with New Japan feel. And that's not to say New Japan, you know, hey, AEW or anything like that. Someone's going to twist this. No. But the idea is that, you know, these companies are looking on how they look after themselves at the end of the day. They're not looking, you know, they'll work together in terms of talent exchanges and that sort of thing. But in the most part, they're not thinking about, you know, I need to do this for this person because they have to do that. And you're never going to have this kind of big alliance against WWE. You're just going to have influence. It's very much a Cold War thing. You have spheres of influence. So AEW has its sphere of influence. WWE might have its sphere of influence, and it's more direct at this current time than what we're seeing. But that's where we're going. So we're ending, it's like this two-state globalization. And all it does is pretty much damage kind of any sort of variety or kind of thing into wrestling, because now, we've now got this thing again where the big places to be are the two American companies who often produce, at times quite similar in terms of styles and that sort of thing. It's becoming more similar as well. I think AEW is becoming more similar as they go on.
Well, it's why it's so frustrating lately and so challenging to watch AEW is seeing the similarities and looking at bullshit like that Hurt Business segment and saying, like, why do I have this is the kind of shit I turned off WWE for. Yeah. Why am I seeing it in this fucking company, right? Like beyond the wrestling style, like the storytelling style, all that other stuff. Like, that's the kind of stuff where it just becomes like why are we leaning into being the same? That's just a sadder, like less attended version of a shitty WWE show.
But what worries me the most, my selfish bit as well, is that you've got a lot of this kind of talent come from other countries who then who workers, they have to work harder, or they have to change things more. They're not allowed to be what they, they're not allowed to, in that kind of thing. Right. Everything they learn, everything they grow up with, they have to get rid of it, and we don't see the success rate with them, and that's the top of where they're supposed to get to, and yet they're not treated the same. Neither company. We don't allow them to be successful in the way that you want them to be. So they're aiming to be something where they're having to work a step down when they get there. I find it's good to it's really hard to put these words together to not sound really stupid, but it's great that we now have two companies in terms of competitiveness, in terms of pay structure, in terms of raising that top end bar for everyone. That's much better than what we would have had with a WWE monopoly in the West.
Yes.
But in terms of, a global outlook and wrestling thriving on a global scale, we're coming further and further away from that, from where we have been, in previous decades, the 90s, 80s, 2010s. And you can't see how it could ever go back to that, or you have that competitiveness. Because now, like somewhere like Mexico, where we were seeing CML kind of path its own way and have its own success and make its own, and be making its own stars and, keeping its own kind of identity in the most part. Even that's going to be impacted now because of WWE's kind of move into that market in this way, and then the response that they need to make to that. So it just makes you worried about where we go from here, because the idea of just two American companies dominating globally, the look, the feel of wrestling, how everything works, and losing all those kind of individual styles and kind of the individual input and the way the storytelling and everything that's different, that does worry me. I know everyone says, oh, you've been worried for years about WWE taking over the world, but it feels closer than ever.
Well, I think it's fair to say that, again, it's not AEW's fault, but there are repercussions to the founding of AEW that I think a lot of people didn't foresee globally when they, when it first started.
No, and in the pandemic, that makes a big thing. And it impact TV money. They have so much more money than everybody else because, businesses like New Japan, like Noah or Stardom or CML, they were all ticket money. CML obviously has the local element, same as AAA, but they're all mainly driven by ticket money businesses. They are not able to compete with this huge amount of TV money. It's not an option, and that makes them vulnerable.
Yeah.
So, right. Seeing as we're on New Japan, before I mention New Japan, I just want to say, for anyone that hasn't watched it, go and watch, if you can, go and watch All-Star Grand Prix from this morning. Phenomenal Stardom show, and retirement of Tam Nakano. And I'm bringing this up before we talk about New Japan and Tetsuya Naito, because I think sometimes we overlook, like, the most important things that you get out of pro wrestling as a fan, is when you connect to these characters and you watch their journeys. And it can be quite stifling when that kind of ends. It's kind of it's emotional, It'll be the same when Tanahashi retires next year. I am sure, plenty of people are going to feel really emotional about that one too, because you invest so much time in these things, and it has, you have to keep doing that. Like, it's probably the most important thing. If you can't just watch this thing as one thing happening, you have to invest in a story or invest in these people. And I think they did a great job in kind of tying that up today with Tam Nakano. And it'll be interesting. They did their biggest ever crowd for Stardom today. So it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. There's some free agents kind of coming out and about, especially female free agents in general this summer.
Yep.
Where is Mayu Iwatani going? We'll find out. Who knows? Where's Thekla going? She was fired, quote unquote, from Stardom this morning. Believe she's going somewhere. Bozilla, who went home for family health reasons from Marigold, I expect she'll get picked up. She destroyed Megan Bain on the one of the shows on the Vegas shows, which was very surprising to see someone do that. But and then obviously Mariah May, which is the big talking point.
Big talking point on this one.
In the West. But at the
Everybody
end of the day,
expects her to go to
I think she will.
WWE.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, look, I think we have to get used to more of that. And it's a case of, I think everyone wants to make these decisions a moral play. And at the end of the day, they're a personal decision. You make your decision based on what you look to achieve in life, what do you value? Because in terms of working environment, a lot of the time there isn't a huge difference between the two companies. And that's what they see. Not everybody sees everything else or feels everything else. And that doesn't just go for wrestling, that goes across the board, doesn't it? So, they make personal working decisions, and good luck to them to whatever they do next. That's the way I look at it. It's a job. So, good luck in whatever you do next.
Yeah, I think the idea that, like, Mariah leaving is, like, she used AEW or whatever, like, I'm not a big fan of that kind of mindset, or, I don't see how anything she's done is, she came in, had a great program, did a terrific thing with, Tony was the star. Tony's the one that got over more. That, she beat Mariah, and if Mariah's on her way out, it's a great program. Thank you very much. Maybe you can do business in another couple of years. You know, like I have a hard time.
That's what you want.
That's what you want. Like I don't know, again, my own personal feelings about WWE aside, like there's two companies. Wrestlers are going to work in multiple companies. Mariah's not somebody who's made a big production or built her brand around her political, viewpoints or her morals or whatever. So as a result, good for her. And do I think it's going to be a little sad to watch her do the actual version of the satirical version of her gimmick that she was doing in AEW? Yes, but if that's her choice and that's what she wants, then I respect that. And you know what? Hopefully she'll come back.
Because you can look at the other side and you can look at her reign booking when Tony wasn't around and think that she may have seen, okay, you're not going to prioritise me in the way that you do when you're invested in somebody. So maybe I try my hand elsewhere. Or, they still look at it and you think, what time do the women get on WWE television?
Yep.
It's not just match time, but like the spots and that sort of thing, promo time, openings, all them sort of things, promotion. And you weigh it up, and it's an individual choice. And maybe you get that decision wrong, maybe you get that decision right. You don't know. But, if someone comes in and they work hard and they do everything that they're supposed to do and they commit to it, they're not coasting or just kind of earning money, then as they make that decision after they made that decision, I think we have to normalise again.
People leaving companies and
people leaving company and moving around.
It's gonna happen, and I think ironically, I think it's gonna happen more as it means less, right? And I think we've seen this, and you and I have talked about this on other shows, that it's become so normalized. It's become more normalized, but to a degree, the debuts don't mean as much as they did anymore. Right? Yeah. They're not the big, from
you're
AEW
you're not moving for a big debut anymore. You can't. Right. You're moving for different opportunities or a different workplace or whatever, or different kind of lifestyle choices, whatever it may be.
Right. But I will say this whole, I'm going to comb through every social media post ever made by this person to see if they actually think this, if they're fed pilled or whatever. Give me a fucking, stop with that bullshit. It's stupid. All right. New Japan Pro Wrestling. Trish, we produced our last episode. It came out on Tuesday morning, April 15th, and on Wednesday morning, April 16th, the news came out that Tetsuya Naito was going to not renew his contract with New Japan Pro Wrestling. He was going to leave New Japan Pro Wrestling. What he is going to do is still unclear. I think a lot of folks are going to guess that he's just going to take some time to heal because he is a man who is in rough physical shape. But The internet was wild with news of what Trish's reaction to this would be. Many messages poured in from across the globe. How is Trish doing? Is Trish okay? Trish, what's going on with you? So Trish, can you take a moment to tell the masses your mental state, and can we get an update on where you are emotionally as the news of Naito's leaving New Japan Pro Wrestling has shook the wrestling world?
It was so funny because everyone was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm walking an alpaca."
Trish posting on the Discord pictures of an alpaca and being like, "What do you mean? Everything's great. I'm not crashing out."
No, I wasn't. The funny thing is that I wasn't crashing out. I was literally like dealing with a crazy alpaca that was like, "I'm gonna have a sit down protest because I'm not allowed to eat the bad weed, or I'm gonna like." Weed as in plant, not.
I was going to say, you don't want the bad weed. Come on. You know the bad weed's not a good... Please, my doctor's always saying, don't get it on the black market that could be laced with fentanyl. Never want the bad weed. Only buy from reputable dealers, Trish. Tell that to any alpaca friends you have.
Vinny would have bought from any dealer, I think. Yeah, he was like, he didn't care, right? He's tripping up other alpacas and humans, and they get to the end and they speed them like the nice hay, like the feeding hay, like we feed the rabbits. And he's like barging them all out the way, like, get out of the fucking way, it's mine. But yeah, I was like, so it was really funny because I planned to do that. I booked it like beforehand, and yeah, so when we did the podcast, you can record scratch this and you'll hear me going, "Oh, Naito will be fine," because there were plans in place for him. And you got to understand that when Naito whines to Tokyo Sports, it's like John Moxley whining in backstage promos, right? Like they'll air all their grievances, but it never really kind of goes anywhere, which is kind of an ironic statement after last year, but there we are. And so you just kind of like, it's like Boy Who Cried Wolf. You just kind of go, yeah, whatever, Naito, shut up. Like, but when he did the April 1st one, and he said, the fact he was working without a contract this year was not a surprise, because there have been a number of people working without a contract this year, far more than in previous years, for far longer. And at first, at the start of the year, there was talk about kind of some people not being renewed. That was a surprise, who were on longer term deals, maybe some of the more senior kind of parts of New Japan. And that was kind of like weird, but people kind of went, okay. Because then other people, it was like, oh, they're going to work it out, and we have this understanding that there's not going to be huge pay rises, or there's not going to be any pay rises, which would actually be a decrease because inflation is pretty high in Japan as it is the rest of the world. But it was a case of, it'll get done. And then as we've progressed through the year, the kind of emotions about this have got higher. This is different from someone like Jeff Cobb, right? Jeff Cobb is in that group with Kevin Knight, TJP, yes, it's funny, who were all named kind of back in Wrestle Kingdom week that they were going to go and try and do things elsewhere. They were going to test the waters in the US, those were given things. This isn't the same. Like, we expected some of these guys to go elsewhere from Wrestle Kingdom weekend. The Jeff Cobb thing's funny. I made a quip about it last time because, he was talking about all like, internet and whatever, and when he won the tag titles, and it was confirmed literally that week to me that like, oh, he's going. He's actually like, this has all been like 99% sure, but now it's like he's going. So, and then he was pulled early. And I think WWE are denying it and saying, oh, he was always pulled at this time. No, he was supposed to work to the end of the Dontaku tour. He was supposed to challenge Hiroki Goto for the IWGP in Fukuoka, I can't speak, Jesus. Which is where he's resided for the last few years. And that was going to be the end of it. And then they pulled him. So then he did the Tanahashi match in Korakuen, last week. This was highly emotional, actually, not for him, but mainly for the main event, the elimination tag, and Naito just looking completely distraught and physically destroyed. But it was like, that one was coming. We knew that was coming. Everybody in New Japan knew that was coming. That they messed with the time and they did what they did with Omos and Stephanie Vaquer and many other people is just WWE doing WWE things. But we knew that was coming. And it was fine because, look, Jeff Cobb has been in New Japan for a decade now, and he's not going to rise up any further. He had his spot, but it was always kind of the guy that might be like a first challenger for a Never belt or something like that. And that's it. So if he wants to, especially his age, he's in his early 40s now, if he feels like he wants to financially secure his family, and I believe that was the major driver, then fair enough. You try that opportunity, you do that because you're coming towards the end of your kind of in-ring career, and at the end of the day, it's a job. People want to secure their families, first and foremost, before anything else. So I thought it made sense on a dual sense for him to try his hand there, and if that worked out, then it was fine. And then a couple of days later, it was like this Naito news drops, and mentally, I don't know. I guess I reckon I'll feel more emotional when I watch the Don Taku stuff next week.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, he'll still be around. He'll still be doing things in future. I don't think he'll take a long layoff because he's Naito and he can't stay away. He had eye surgery and he was back, messing around with Hiromu and Korakuen like less than a week later. That's kind of who he is. I think he's addicted to it. But the things that you think about with this is a guy that gave his body to New Japan. When everybody else was walking out, going, the pandemic was strong, he gave every single thing he did. He wrestled far more hours than anybody else in the company. He didn't go and abandon them or make false promises and then turn back like some other people did. He didn't run off to the US for money or anything like that. In fact, he took pay cuts multiple times, to ensure that it was for the betterment of New Japan. He was a guy that had been there for 20 years who loves New Japan. And the idea of him now considering he's leaving makes you wonder what is going on there. And there may be, and you can read what I wrote in the newsletter because it sums it up in that regard. But it may be that his expectation of where he belongs on the card and their expectation of where he belongs on the card and then subsequent kind of monetary value of that are different. And he has been moved more to one side in the last 12 months. He's been in a tag thing with Hiromu doing the Tendereros, and they've allowed Yota Tsuji to kind of front that group a lot more. But there's a difference to that and then being paid like that, because as much as he's been in those support roles, he's still being a huge part of the draw. He's still the guy selling the most merch. There's still lots of markets where they put him in headline matches. Hiroshima, what do you do for Hiroshima when you're doing the G1? You put him in the main match, and that's what sells the tickets. They've just done Hiroshima Red Zone and, sold over 3,000 tickets. It's the biggest road to Dontaku crowd that I can remember, and I keep back to 2015. It's only second, there's nothing in a pandemic that even comes close to that. In fact, the first date you get into 2019 G1 and World Tag League, which was built about his chase to the double gold at Wrestle Kingdom 14. So there are so many of these markets where he is still a key draw. And, and not just the likes of Hiroshima, your big markets, your Tokyo, your Osaka, he has a huge impact on. So while he might be a secondary guy in terms of what he's doing in the ring, he can still have these huge impacts on these markets. So it is a big loss. It will be a huge ticket loss. This is their biggest ticket draw in the last decade. I don't care what anybody else says, because you make it up in your head, because you want whoever the company present to be like the top guy. This was their biggest, over the last decade, this is their most consistent ticket mover. At times it's been their only ticket mover. And maybe that changes now because Goto is having such success. And maybe they thought, that gives them enough impetus to say, we have that. We have Tanahashi's last year. We want to start moving some of these guys in, the younger guys, the Sujis, the Umaras, the Gabe Kids, depending on how long they can keep Gabe Kid for long term. But you want to start moving some of these upwards. And did he kind of stand in the way of, and it's that thing that we talked about with the WWE stuff. The only way you can make the new stars is to not have the old ones standing over it so much anymore. And is this now an opportunity to do that? But it's one of them that in a short term, this is going to hurt New Japan pretty badly. And they'll be able to cover it in some aspects because of the tours that are coming out. So you've got Best of Super Juniors coming up. But when we get to, and hoping that G1, we're hoping that Tanahashi's last G1 will cover it. But there will be markets where it won't, and it will hurt them in merch. There's absolutely no way it won't. But it may hurt them more depending on what he does next. Is he going to work produce shows like Keno, or Sari, or other people who are being quite successful in that way of basically, because a produce show is it's basically you producing your own show. They're calling it a produce show, so that's kind of the name. But if he ran even 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of them a year, that's a crowd that they're going to take somewhere, whether it's Korakuen or wherever. So that could be quite successful. Or does he walk into another company? Is there other companies that could potentially pick up financial kind of money maybe from elsewhere that could help to support him? Even though, someone like Noah, Cyberfight, they could easily, bring him in for dates. You've got a natural program with Ozawa there, who's kind of doing a similar gimmick to what Naito was in the mid-2010s. So you could do that, and then is that more damaging? That you have all the impetus on a different company. So he can have an impact in different ways still. And I think emotionally, he's the guy with the biggest emotional connection. He's the guy that is in and out with Tanahashi as the most popular wrestler in Japan, for a lot of the last decade as well. So you don't have to manage that fan expectation. I don't think people were very fond of the fact they put tickets on for Dominion to their fan club, their biggest. It's like an AEW pre-sale, right? They put them on the day before that got announced, which was not the greatest choice, I don't think, in terms of fan reception. So they're going to have to work around that. But the biggest thing is that they need to, I think, look at what Stardom have done over the last year when they lost some of their top talent to Marigold, and look at how they've been able to kind of invigorate their business over and over. And look maybe what they did in the 2010s, when they lost Nakamura and AJ Styles to WWE, and you kept losing people on a consistent basis, and they were able to elevate people upwards because they had them ready and they were willing to invest in them, that their business continued to grow. And if that means shortening the kind of excursion lengths the same way that Noah Bizarro or Stardom do, then you need to do that. But you've got to get some of these people going now. You have no choice. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing they have no choice now. That you're not going to have a Tanahashi to kind of bail you out anymore, and you're not going to have a Naito to bail you out anymore. So, or to keep you standing. And you have this new breed of kind of people that can help to put over the young guys who can work with them. Even someone like Finlay I would include in that, but you've got a Goto, you've got a Finlay, you've got a Zack Sabre Jr. You have to start with him now. Suji's not getting any younger. He probably needs to be the first one up, and Gabe Kidd just after that. But you have to get going and stop with the Shota Umino thing for at least 3 weeks. Jesus. He's in trouble again for his monkey thing, which is no surprise to anybody. Shingo monkey post. But yeah, it's not working right now. Pull back on that, but get these other guys moving, because you're going to need to now. Yeah, it's quite a testing time for New Japan, and but also can be quite an exciting time because it's different. We don't know what it's going to look like. Is Hiromu finally going to be a heavyweight? Probably not, but I'll keep dreaming. But yeah, I think there's a part of me that will probably be emotional about next weekend to see Naito's time in New Japan come up. But I also think that sometimes we look at things and we either are angry or are sad about things ending. And I think maybe as I get older, I get more reflective of, I'm glad that we saw some of these things. I'm glad that, for me personally, as a completely selfish, part of me, I'm glad that, I got so invested in and found so much enjoyment in his character and his story from the moment I saw him walk out in his daft, silver cloak and his silver mask in York Hall, all the way through, and to watch that story and how that developed, and to feel that kind of ultimate feeling of triumph at Wrestle Kingdom 14, and to be lucky enough to see him do like a Champions roll call in Japan, or to win the belt back at Vendor, or to see him face Ibushi. You just got to remember all these things where you really connect with something and it gave you something, like some emotion in your life, and that's where wrestling's really powerful, and that's where we kind of get away from sometimes, and we will, because we talk all the numbers and everything like that. But that's that personal connection that kind of keeps you going. So rather than kind of being sad of, what's happened to him physically, or kind of involved in the politics, and I think there's plenty to worry about in terms of where New Japan at, that you can see plenty of things that would justify that. But in terms of Naito himself, I try and think of everything, that character that I've enjoyed, and how much fun that's brought to parts of my life. And that's the way I look at it. And yeah, it's a good job we're not doing next one, because I'll be a mess next week, I'm sure. But for now, I was pretty calm. I was just like, I'm just an alpaca, I'm okay. And then I go into it's a train thing, isn't it? I go logically. So I'm like, okay, let's see what we can find out. Let's see what we can find, what's going on. Let's adventure into things as much as we can. So yeah, that was that. And we'll see how we go. It's a big week for them coming up to that tour. The tour is obviously going to be one of their strongest tours ever when it finishes. That will sell out. It's going to be up there with 2019, 2018 numbers for second night at Dontaku by the look of it. And it's an end of an era, but sometimes you have to have those things. You have to move on at some point, and not everything is going to be a nice ending, you know? And that's a big thing that they lost, you know, the retirement tour for Naito and that match. You know, they could potentially have it in the future, but if they don't, then that's a huge money spinner. You know, Noah managed to get a whole year of Muto's retirement, and a big gate for that. So these are big things in Japan. So, but yeah, we'll see. I just enjoyed the last bit of Hiromu and Naito together yesterday, sort of thing. And that's been the best fun in the last few months, is just seeing how much they've enjoyed wrestling together and seeing them smile like that, because after all these years. Do you know what he has done, though, that pisses me off, and it's going to forever piss me off, right? Naito.
Yep.
Yeah?
Yep.
The one thing about his reps that's always going to piss me off is this side effect that we have, that this guy who's the Dark Ace, you know, he's the guy that he sells a huge amount of tickets. He's kind of like the people's champion in that way, but he'll never be promoted like the company. But the company do promote him. Is that we now use him to kind of get away with every bit of shit booking in every company fucking ever, right? Yeah. So it's like, oh, because he didn't win the title at Wrestle Kingdom 12, and it's like, okay, so yeah, but he won it at Wrestle Kingdom 14. So long-term booking, everything is long-term booking, so we can get away with. No, he was booked in that period. Go look at what he did during that period, right? He wins the wide belt from Suzuki. He drops it to Jericho at Dominion in a featured singles match on the second biggest show of the year. He wins it back at Wrestle Kingdom 13 from Chris Jericho in a big featured match at the biggest show of the year. He then loses it to Ibushi on the big US show, you know, the one with Ring of Honor in Madison Square Garden. He then wins it back at Dominion on their second biggest show of the year. He loses it to Jay White, and then he wins it back at Wrestle Kingdom, and then he beats Okada to set up that 2 minutes. They didn't book him as a fucking loser, okay?
Right.
Because he's always getting, you know, he loses something, he has immediate redemption within a few months. And even that ultimate redemption is in that couple of years. It's like, that was the way they booked him. In fact, if you want to compare it to booking, like in AEW, for example, the closest to that right now is Will Ospreay. You know, he loses, and then he gains it back. He loses, he gains it back. They're in a prominent position. He's marketed. He's all across everything. You know, and it's not the same because, you know, Naito was never kind of promoted in terms of being the figurehead, like the guy, the centerpiece, in a way that AEW do with Will. But it's like, that's the booking. He wasn't a fucking loser in terms of the way they booked him. And now it's like everyone uses it. It's like, oh, it'd be like Naito. It's not like fucking Naito. Stop it. Anyway, right, that's enough. That's enough. I'm not going too far over. I'm not having Leah shout at us when we're off for a month. But doing anything fun for our month off?
I got some plans.
Got some plans?
I got some schemes. I got some things going on. I'm excited about it. What about you, my friend?
I got lots of football. That's my thing.
Football.
Yeah, lots of football. FA Cup final, Champions League final. But yeah, it'd be fun. But yeah, there we go. Newsletter will continue. Doing pretty all right with that. We got another one out this week. We've got some features on. It's the Money in the Chase. I quite like that one. We've got an answer on Special Little Guy based out of the Stardom show this week, and a few other things as well, including our friend Chris, his trip around the independents at WrestleMania, which I found was a fascinating read. So it's kind of cool to be on someone's journey with them. But that's that.
Always a good read, the newsletter. Highly
We're getting
recommended.
there. Yes. And
I also want to recommend. Trish sort of briefly mentioned it, but obviously we always plug Tunnel Talk because we think it's fantastic. But last week's episode that came out on April 20th, The Boy Collector is the name of it. The segment on MJF and the Hurt Syndicate, we didn't really touch on that today at any length. But in terms of how I feel about it, and I think, Trish, in terms of how you feel about it, and, you know, I don't think Tunnel Talk could express it any better. We couldn't express it any better than Tunnel Talk did. And I encourage you to listen to it and give it some thought if it's a topic that you've been frustrated by or, you know, the internet's a terrible place for that kind of discourse.
Sure. And, I think if you want to hear how that sort of thing actually feels to women, to be honest with you, because I've seen very much a gender differentiation on that in a lot of regard at times, and especially in terms of voices. I don't mean that in general, I mean in terms of the voices who are discussing it. So I think it's something that if you can, listen to it and understand the frustrations, because
they exist.
They exist, and it was an awful fucking segment.
It was an awful segment. And Tunnel Talk stuff is all time-stamped, so if you're not interested in listening to the rest of the podcast, that's fine. But
it's on YouTube as well.
It's on YouTube as well. Please seek it out. It's, Yeah,
and we are produced by Leah of Tunnel Talk, our wonderful friend Leah. She's blowing me kisses right now. There we go. And Tunnel Talk every Sunday morning. Make it the start of your Sunday routine as they explore the stories, the characters, and the themes of AEW. You can also listen to all the other great podcasts on the Social Suplex Network through any of your favourite podcast providers, or Red Circle, which was the name that I forgot off the top of my head even though I'm reading it. You can also join us at the Social Suplex Discord, join many other wrestling fans and hosts in discussion of numerous topics, and ask as many questions as you can. You also get pictures of cute alpacas. See, you could have had Naito things, but you could have had alpacas. That's why you should have been in our Discord that Wednesday. It was so weird. That was such a weird day. You can also find us on X, Twitter. What do we call it? X now? I don't know. Trish and Sarah at Trish and Sarah. You can find us under our names at Blue Sky, because we're never going to be able to fix that thing. You can email us at trishandsarahpod@gmail.com, trishandsarahpod@gmail.com with any of your questions. I have got a couple. I'm going to keep them for next time out. In fact, one of them we've kind of answered anyway. I've pretty much answered anyway. One of them will relate to Double or Nothing, so I'm definitely keeping that one. We'll be back in audio wise in 4 weeks. So enjoy everything until then. Good luck for anybody that's on the on sales for Forbidden Door or for the tapings in Glasgow. Anyone else that's still trying to get tickets for the Mexican shows, if you've got them, fantastic. Enjoy, please send us reports. We've already got Daniel on speed dial, haven't we? So
yes.
We want to hear as much about those shows as we can. And it's Golden Week, so there's lots of wrestling to watch for me for the next week in Japan. So that will be where I live. So anything else? Are we good? Have I forgotten anything? Have I broke anything?
So.
I haven't broke anything today. That's quite impressive. Okay. So until then, I've been Trish.
I've been Sarah.
And this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. We thank you once more for listening.